Alright, folks. Welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、おかえりなさい。今日は177日目です。Is day 177. We are starting with Bunpro today because today is a very special Wanikani day. And more or less, I'm going to try to close it out with Wanikani. We do have to stay on top of our Bunpro and our Hansi Hero. Yesterday, a bit of a late start today. Yesterday, we indulged in our Persona 5 The Phantom X global anniversary. Kind of a bit of a mixed bag, but I do find it a place with a lot of talking points, right? Mixed bags, different ideas, intersection of different perspectives and different interests that creates a lot of interesting discussion. So I kind of indulge myself in that conversation, what worked for me personally, what didn't work for me, and then try to talk about other perspectives, like did it work for others. And I'm bringing this up largely because learning a language, integrating different cultures, and finding your way of balancing that type of information is very much a discussion topic in itself. So anyways, let's get into our 45 grammar points today. It appears. Let's go through them. Okay. So we have, oh no, Suti, okay, Stephen, 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 Stephen Hawking に一回 at least 会いたかったのに oh, this is like the trailing off thing. At least, which at least am I going with? This is okay, so we have ikai, right? So it's after. Yamaku, I just looked up your account to see if you had a really quick stream and you had ended already. Oh, okay. Hello there, Procon. How are you doing? So ikai after maybe ikai wa
スティーブン・ホーキングに一回は会いたかったのに。
Stephen Hawking. Rest in peace, Stephen Hawking. 日本語の勉強を始める in the event of 教科書を買わなくてはいけない。in the event. You're doing well. You want to say thank you for that sentence you sent again? Amazing use of words. There was a time. I know you don't watch like things like Mythical Kitchen. His name is Josh, right? Josh, he used to be. This is a tangential coincidence. There are particular personalities that I resonate towards, and it's not a coincidence. I think it's more of a correlation because of the internet. So, Josh, when he was younger, like when he was a teenager and stuff, like in college, he was a writer, and occasionally during his Mythical Kitchen stuff, he would allude to his old writings, and where is this story going is that when he was reading some of his like prompts, like the show makes a gag and points out, and he points like his humor at himself a lot. He would talk about how he was incredibly eccentric and verbose in his writing. So some of his articles that he published back then when he was a writer before he became a content creator, it was like incredibly eccentrically uh liberal, maybe to a fault, excessive use of verbosity in his like language. And the sentence that I wrote, the thing about partaking in the perhaps the cornucopia and the pandemonium that is the lexiconal existence of the eccentricity of English vocabulary, etc., that type of thing. When I was younger, like much younger, I was also very similar in that nature, where it was very fun to string together overly excessive use of exaggerated, bombastic vocabulary that could be substituted with an act of sophistication and eloquence, right? That type of string of vocabulary words all together. And I remember I had a sobering, one of the, pretty sure one of my English teachers, I think I still know his name, but for discretion, um, he wrote like, "Why are you writing redundant phrases with, you know, excessive use of vocabulary and whatnot?" It's kind of one of those things when you ask like ChatGPT, "Please change my prompt and add more complex vocabulary," and you just get this diarrhea of um, almost ironically representative of one's own true self when you were younger. However, it lacked refinement and restraint when it comes to the uh, coherence and like the tact and like tastefulness of refined language and writing, right? So it does remind me a lot about my of youth. When youth tacks on to something, they have an tendency to over exaggerate or to be incredibly passionate. So when he was reading some of his like old writings about food, so he was a food journalist, Josh, and the way he described a dish was exactly what I was channeling my younger self. I used to sound like that, my younger self, like the partaking in the ephemeral, potentially rarely resonating experience of exchanging esoteric English vocabulary with a fleeting, serendipitous moment with a stranger online. Like that's the thing when I was younger that I thought, oh yeah, that's the era of sophistication, right? The passionate youth that overdo things, which is what happened when I was younger. Nowadays, obviously, the particular use of specific words, however complex they are or nuanced they are opportunistically used. Like occasionally I would throw in a slap, you know, a hits different, at just as much as I would throw in an occasional gosh darn it, right? Hooligans, shenanigan, or something a little bit more eloquent, like the frivolity of someone's vividly palpable passion, something like that. You can throw these in here and there, and the idea is that I'm basically switching voices. Like I don't usually have an incredible amount of time, like opportunities, which you offered me the very striking opportunity to channel my old, incredibly eccentric, youthful self when I did not understand the word restraint or discipline, right? So it was a interesting trip down memory lane when you just let loose on some overly unnecessarily complicated string of vocabulary words. Nowadays, I try to like mirror the person I'm talking to while dabbling in different voices. So, like Gen Z, like speaking to Gen Z, it would be the momentary use of Gen Z keywords in order to create a point of resonance, and then elaborate using different voices. I think I'm not sure if I'll ever get to a point where I can illustrate that in Japanese or in Chinese while at the same time simultaneously translating it to some extent. However, in English, I can say that the proficiency of an English speaker, right? Like, say I'm a native Japanese speaker, the proficiency is based on how wide your net that you can cast with your language. So for me, whenever someone tells me that they're fluent in Japanese and they can only speak in casual Japanese or they only care about casual Japanese, personally, that would be a native speaker that I would gain less impressions from than a speaker who enjoys the linguistic aspect of their own language. So it's not that it's of lower value or higher value, not a competition. For myself, I don't necessarily think that people understand like my opinion on what constitutes as someone who is competent in the skill that they're looking at. I believe from my formal education, personally, this is my personal bias, that someone who is incredibly competent in the skill that they are presenting as surely it has a specialized aspect. So the thing that they excel at. However, it is propped by it's like a pyramid. It's propped by an even larger base foundation that casts a very wide foundation, like a wide net. So when someone tells me, oh yeah, they're really good at video games, and they say, I only play first-person shooters, that to me leaves me with an impression of someone who is less competent, not necessarily more competent. Now, the thing is, I could also be fair and say that person is a specialist, right? That's semantics. Maybe it might offend the person. So typically I don't use those classifications directly at the person. If you're asking me, a true specialist or a true like expert is one that has a pyramid of skills, right? And at the base is the wide net. And then as you get closer up, sometimes you can let that stuff out. And that thing that you said about the amazing use of words, it's up here. You don't get to use it I don't get to use it very often. Most of the time online, like while we're streaming, I would say, like, say these are separated by levels. We would be, you and I, when we get into like some very heavy discussions, would be somewhere around here. And then this is where 90% of, when I say that middle school English and high school English is very efficacious, comforting, and appropriate, right? Appropriate. It would be somewhere in the bottom. Here is when we do the 10% talk, where we do like deep cuts and whatnot. And then occasionally up here, right, we have like the 1% and then the 0.1%. These are rare opportunities that I would seize, and the 1% often deals with written stuff. So not even spoken stuff. So the large majority of the stuff here is spoken. And it's really telling oftentimes when people think that I have no, like, it's not that they think I have a low proficiency in English. Oftentimes, people seem or sound like they have low proficiencies, largely because the most appropriate use of the English language is a lower complexity, right? It wouldn't be called colloquialism, in my opinion, for a reason, right? So, like, you probably have delved into this side of the English, the English as in English culture. in a British culture where when you think of colloquialism, there was a time when this is considered rustic, right? Rustic, vulgar, unrefined. And I find that nowadays I have become accustomed to using words like colloquialism, conversationalism as a euphemism for the historical aspect that when you think about the lay, the common vernacular, right? Colloquialism, conversationalism, you're thinking about something that is rustic, vulgar, and unrefined, common to most people. And then when you get up here, you get the, we'll try to balance out the negativity and the positivity, you get the snobbery, right? The snobbery, the eloquence, sophistication, or the technical. So I don't use this stuff very often. It is nice to know that I can still pull out a sentence that can be like nearly like 80% French and 20% Germanic. That's kind of the thing that I talked about before, where English is heavily influenced by both French and Germanic language, right? French specifically, I know French is a Romance language. You could say Romance language, but we're going to say specifically French. And you can technically express the same mechanical, pragmatic message through entirely relying on, I believe it's, we'll do some rough estimate. I believe it's like somewhere around 60% and 40%, like when it comes to English vocabulary. So technically Romance, but French. And oftentimes, all the foundational languages that are in colloquial and conversational is of Germanic origin. And then all of the like fancy, sophisticated stuff, they're heavily influenced by French. So whenever you're thinking about like breaking out your erudites and your neophytes, as opposed to saying like noob and pro, noob and pro, you got like the Latin and Germanic stuff, right? Latin and Germanic stuff is probably close to noob and pro, like just like the pro, the suffix, the prefix pro, but now it's an abbreviation for professional and so on like that. Meanwhile, French probably use something like erudite is okay. I would say maybe like a adept. Actually, I'm not sure if adept is of French or other. No, it's a Latin word. Adeptus. Okay. So that's not a great example, but I'm also not that well seasoned in my etymology. I saw what I am sharing here is a extension of etymologists demonstrating these things. I do not have a running categorization of what, if I can actually segregate the French and the Latin and Germanic influence. In terms of conversational, I would say, generally speaking, yeah, you're pretty safe when we're speaking colloquially and conversationally. And I think it's this contrast that makes it really funny. Like, when you talk in a very eloquent, sophisticated, and technical way, like if you write it, typically writing is the time when I do these things. Occasionally, I could try to, what is that, like puffing up your chest, like when someone, I don't encounter many people online that does this. Again, it's writing online, like comments or threads or something. However, if someone spoke to me and they suddenly like They're like, oh, I don't like the ire of your fatalistic approach to conversationalism or whatever that means, right? Whatever that means. I'm like, I have no idea what you just said. However, I am familiar with the terms you have strung together. Let's, and then I would match that person's energy. So occasionally, very occasionally, that side of it's very ephemeral. Like, you say one sentence, they reciprocate that sentence, and then they're like, all right, bro. Like, it ain't, chill. I was just kidding. ChatGPT, or I use ChatGPT to write that sentence, or something like that. That's usually what happens. The occasional person who writes like a incredible soliloquy of complex ideas through elevated, rarely used vocabulary would often, when I retort, when I respond to it, and matching its energy, immediately breaks down into yo, just chill. I was just experimenting with ChatGPT. That's usually what happened. It's happened like 7 or 8 times in the past 2.5 years when someone was trying to educate me on Japanese, and then I responded with a very analytical, technical response in English, and then that person decided to turn on ChatGPT and write something that clearly didn't match their original response. Like, you don't go from, yo, dude, check this guy out, insert name, you're welcome, to sounding like H.P. Lovecraft, right? That's incongruous, but you could argue. So I continue to entertain these people because I could have met the rare person, right? The rare person that would do what I feel that I can do, and it would be a great friendship, the start of a friendship. If someone can truly, in fact, resonate with me about the appropriateness of sounding like some Gen Z using colloquialism, and then suddenly shifting over to something incredibly sophisticated and nuanced that is in a different voice. I don't think people think that skill is useful. For most people. Like, what I mean is, when someone operates throughout their lives, they don't have to be eloquently sophisticated in different spheres of communication in order to match different appropriate things that they are obligated, right? I do, because I like it. I enjoy that. Ever since I was young and growing up, I had to adaptively change my voice, like code swapping. Code swapping is involved in communication. So I often find it refreshing whenever I have the opportunity to sound like something else. I'm not saying I'm not sounding like myself. I actually do sound like all of these voices. The idea is I don't use them all at once. We're not homogenizing the voice. So for the longest time when I'm doing these streams, I often kind of a little bit critical at compartmentalization. This is with a very big asterisk. If compartmentalization creates alienation and bigotry, that's not what I'm aiming at for compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is a great way to try to understand, like, in a purity sense of various things isolated and not brought together, right? However, I use that for the purpose of understanding other people, not of excluding other people. So the thing that I have very reticent about is that when someone learns a target language, which is what my post was about today, like, I already prepared this story, by the way, Procon, I'm sure you could imagine why I'm a little bit late. I had a longer week this past week because I was covering something that released a week ago, and then there was an anniversary event yesterday. I was coming up with another story, and the story was about compartmentalization, like how people do comparisons in order to make comparisons between them. Like, hey, the song is in Korean, right? We were talking about K-pop Demon Hunters in the Discord. The song is in Korean. So now the Japanese version came out of a Korean song. However, it was effortfully done in Japanese. So when someone compares them, it requires compartmentalization. If you're coming from my perspective that I was talking about, if you unify them based on the human condition, then it would become a new thing in itself, right? Or it can be compartmentalized in a way that it is not good. So, like, for example, someone would say, well, it was a Korean song first, so it's going to not be as good in Japanese or English. That would be compartmentalization being used as a form of bigotry or racism or discrimination. Not that those individuals that I'm talking about would do that. The idea is that is the foundation of drawing contrast. To discriminate against something is to compartmentalize them so that they are comparable through discrimination, through contrast. You're discriminating what one has and what isn't. So oftentimes this can form the foundation of separation. Now, there is compartmentalization in order to draw comparison. That is to compare the similarities and the differences, not simply to discriminate. When you discriminate, you're only looking at what is different between them. When you're comparing, you're looking at similarities and differences. So when I am very critical about compartmentalization or concern about compartmentalization, is using it as a form of discrimination only. And that's what the internet does far more regularly than a form of comparison. As in, hey, Korean functions with these properties and Japanese functions with these properties. How do they compare? Not how do they discriminate? How do they contrast? And oftentimes, that's my concern about language learning. Whenever someone learns a target language, they specifically highlight to other people what exists in one language that doesn't exist in another language. And that is the basis on which they like one language over another language. Or you could do way more than that. You can compare them based on similarities and differences. You can even bring them together. So mesh them together, which that is like the core of my foundation. I do both hybridization and separation. So, and then I do comparisons between the separation. So in this way, what happens is I could have a random conversation with someone who is elegantly sophisticated in their tacit way of expression. Yo, bro, we're good. You feel me? Like, I could do that while seemingly keeping it compartmentalized away from my analytical side when they ask me to explain something. So I could explain something not with, bro, hear me out. It is what it is. It do be like that. That wouldn't necessarily appropriately explain something that requires perhaps a more appropriate in-depth discussion using a lot more descriptors than vibing your way through colloquialisms like it's aight, right? So that's kind of the thing that I feel when someone says they have a excellent command of the language or excellent command of something, it doesn't translate to communication. Communication, the thing that I have described just now, in my opinion, is the essence of the communication skill, not that don't overlap with someone's expertise and nuance of their language. So like when someone is capable of commanding incredible complex compound sentences with rolling conditionals and sequences of elegant metaphors and analogies, that's fantastic, right? That is a great way to demonstrate some area of competence in a language. When you say that to someone who's saying, yeah, bro, what up? And then you say that, that is a lack of communication skills. Like, and I think, in my opinion, that big gap actually coincidentally happens very often when you're talking about language learners, especially Japanese language learners, where someone would come by and deliberately find people who they can teach, right? Who they believe they can help and teach, but they come at it in a way that it uses communication skills that are inappropriate for teaching. When someone explains like, oh, hey, by the way, you see this first grammar point that you've ever read? It's actually way more complicated than that. Hey, let me explain the very complicated nuance of this so that you'll remember it 2 years down the line and you'll thank me for it 2 years down the line. Like, yeah. Sorry, you've had me on low volume while you were playing Dead by Daylight. Wow, so I didn't keep on. Did you ask you anything? No, I didn't. It's perfectly fine. Oh, Dead by Daylight. Wait, say that again. The 2 years down the line thing. Oftentimes, one of the essential internet experiences, like if you ever choose in the future protocol when you're like 40 and you want to start a content creation expression of all your exploits in the next 20 years of your life, one of the very common classic patterns now might not exist in the future is the idea that one of the average conversations you would have is someone who may seem like they want to impress upon you how competent they are. So what they do is they go around the internet looking for people who have just started their journey on some sort of skill building, and they would lack communication skills. And one of the telltale signs is when someone tries to help, right? Like they do have pure intentions, but they would come off as, like, for example, if you just started your first Souls-like game, you power it up, or no, you start on your first script, right? Your first programming script. You're like, oh, okay, you're learning this. And someone comes in and like, hey, let me just help you out. The thing you're about to do is, and then they would explain all the ins and outs of the pros and cons of what may happen. And then they're like, don't worry, just trust me. 2 years down the line, you'll thank me. I'm like, meanwhile, that person's like, I just started. Like, do you have anything that would be a little bit more appropriate in terms of that? That's what I mean when I was droning on about how you can be very competent in what you do and yet lack a really poor understanding of communication skills. Do you think they do it as a showing off kind of thing? Honestly, for the most part, most people weren't showing off. They didn't give me any clear indicator that they were showing off. They truly did intend to be incredibly informative. The thing that was missing in the communication skills was no longer there. I would say it's more so of a human condition thing. There are people who do show off, by the way. There are people who do show off. It shows a different sign. The ones that I interact with, especially when you're doing something educational, like if you're doing something studying, it's more so that they have been doing it for quite some time and they rarely engaged in any form of teaching aspect or instructional aspect. So what happens is they talk at the level that they are, if you know what I mean. Like, they talk at the level they are at because they no longer need to remember the level they were at. Like, that happens on an expert level. I think there are plenty of interviews with particular experts that you can tell there are experts that prioritize the communication with a very specific audience that is outside of their level of comprehension, right? And they choose to exercise skills and communication skills, or even be forced into interviews, or like obligated into interviews and stuff that allows them to condition those skills, the communication skills, like a TED Talk, for example. And then there are people who are beyond TED Talk, too good for TED Talk. However, when they provide advice, it's not that they're showing off. It's more like the lack of practice of talking to an audience they're not used to. And online, this has become TikTok. Yeah, and that's a good way to describe it, actually. So when you have someone who's incredibly well read, it's more like a TikTok, basically. Like, it's a TikTok version of a TED Talk, as in someone will give you a really hot take and they would be very sophisticated, incredibly dense, but the person they're talking to would be unable to comprehend what they're alluding to. So it ends up being like a trust me, bro, you'll thank me in 3 years situation. Like, that's what's inferred, right? Like, don't worry, you might not understand anything I'm saying right now. Just listen to what I'm saying. And the person, while they were earnestly trying to explain, a problem that another person may encounter, the other person is like, what do I do right now? Like, can you, it sounds like you know a lot, but the things you say makes no sense to me at the moment. There's no comprehension level at all. It's like, what did you do when you started off? And then the person's like, don't worry about what I did starting off. Like, this is the most important thing. At my level, I will tell you, you don't have to experience what I have to experience, because that stuff can be completely circumvented by these hot takes, right? The internet hustle culture. So I don't genuinely think that they're showing off. I actually think they're doing their best, which is funny because the irony here is doing their best means to offer the most explicit, comprehensive, technical explanation that they can produce without any semblance of a level of communication. So that's like someone explaining to you quantum physics as a physicist. Meanwhile, you're someone who simply is a person who does not ascribe to physics. Like, it still happens between experts, right? Like, you could have a physicist who is poorly in communication skills, or a chemist poorly in communication skills, and they can inform a biologist, and the biologist would be like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Like, what is this esoteric? And it's not as dramatic, because usually the experts would, to each other, would at least try to compromise a middle ground, because they're expecting some esoteric knowledge and jargon that they can't understand. So they're kind of conditioned to tolerate it as well. But the communication skills go both ways. Online, that is not a requirement. Online, it is understood by self-selection. So when you enter a Discord channel, like for example, Procall, you decided, oh yeah, let's go to a Discord of sweaty AI niche community. And then the moment you enter, you are expected to have the semblance of communication skills that circumvents the need to welcome someone new, because the internet has removed the need to do that. You no longer need to form your own parties. You no longer need to scout what the language model is that people are talking. I'm not talking about like LLMs. I'm talking about like the communication style, the LLM, the language model, right? The large language model of the human group. So you enter Discord, it is already presumed that somehow you are an expert. And it goes back to like this comment sometime this week, you don't start an expert. Online, you do. You start as an expert, so oftentimes people talk to each other like they are experts in their own particular way. And that to me is my core of my argument and narrative about communication skills. Someone who is excellent at communicating is not someone who is an expert at disseminating the information that they want. A person who is excellent at communication skill is someone who can adaptively control the competence and exchange of information regardless of the differences of their level of competence. So a TED Talk is an example of someone who sounds like, oh, they're just your average Joe. I can follow them. And then meanwhile, that person who prepped the TED Talk, that might not be their primary voice. It can be one of many voices that they have practiced. So, like, if I step into a high school, I'm not going to pretend like they're all graduate students, right? So, like, you don't talk to a bunch of high school students like they're graduate students. That's effectively being communicatively ignorant. You could fail to do so. That is what communication is. Communication skills is to practice how to do it. So like if I say this quite often, when I go into an elementary school, I have said this before, I'm very poor at explaining things to elementary school students. I rarely interact with elementary school students, so it is expected that my communication skills are deficient. It's not that I'm starting from zero, I can still try, but that is a far cry from an elementary school teacher who spends more time doing that. And then you have middle school, and often I make the disclaimer that the vast majority of people that I speak to, it's very important that I know what type of people, what motivations they have that I speak to on average. So whenever someone tells me, oh yeah, so this and that, and I often identify the type of people that I usually characterize the people that I'm talking about and talking with. So that's why I say young people a lot, not as like young being bad or old people being old being bad. It's that I'm identifying their categorization so that people so then you can identify what type of experience I have. I spend most of my time talking to students in high school and those who want to go to college. And then I also have the opportunity to a lesser extent to talk to younger adults is what I would call them, that are currently at university and looking to go into professional school, right? And professional school is my euphemism or more my inclusive term to use for anything post undergrad, because there are more than just quote unquote graduate school. There's med school, right? Like professional certifications for technology type of thing. It's very interesting to see the average, like over these years, to see what I have experienced as the average level of the most common communication style. The most common communication style is high school and lower. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's to understand that I choose to speak at a high school or lower English because that is the most resonating type of conversation. At this moment, while I was on low volume or something, pro call, I've been using a second to third year college level of communication, which does not sound like the average time when I'm studying this. Like I don't use like, oh well, the relationship between the percentage occurrence of this noun with relationship to this adjective. I'm not saying that. Like, I'm not vocalizing that. That would be highly inappropriate, in my opinion. Like, if someone goes on YouTube, the average person who would watch someone use highly technical and very pedantic and dry descriptor over and over again, that might educate them to sound like that. However, I don't think that's conversational English online. So when you're trying to be appropriate, I'm actually making a compromise. I'm using high school English. However, I actually think the most popular English is middle school English. And specifically Gen Z middle school, Gen Alpha to Gen Z middle school English. And why do I think that? Content is most experienced at that exposure level. So when you click on any content that isn't outside very particular cases like John Green and like a Crash Course, SciShow, they sound explicitly very different from the vast majority of content online. So if you want to sound more relatable, right? I am not as grounded. I am not as relatable, largely because my English can be a little bit like unwelcoming. Like, I'm not saying, yo, man, Japanese, so hard, man. But we're gonna grind through this, right? Pull through, get our I don't know. I don't know how to express it. I haven't really studied, had the opportunity to study how another English person, right? Like another English speaking person troubleshoot through their understanding of their relationship between grammar structures and pitch things. The way I express it, I think it comes off as a college student or a college professor trying to troubleshoot and understand the relationships in the grammar points. I don't think I go much lower. Like, I don't think of it like, oh, that's right. Oh, that's it. Oh, that's this thing, that's this thing, that's that thing, which is this thing. No, I'm literally saying that's what they say. Like, oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. Oh, that's that. And then most of the feedback is reactionary. So there's lacking explanation and descriptors, right? When someone play a video game, it's reacting. The vast majority of the stuff is reacting. So that's middle school and lower, really. Like, oh man, that sucks. Yo, that sucks. Man, this sucks. Oh, that's cool. Oh, this is so OP. That's something that I have infused into my stream life, I suppose. Whenever I'm describing, I get more grounded by using things like that, like interjections, and I guess you could say I emote more often than scholastically explaining things dry. Now, when someone asks me a question and they're talking about education, it's gonna come off as overtly dry when I'm explaining the concept. And in order to offset that, I then transition into an analogy that incorporates a personal touch so that it can be relatable. In that way is a way for me to demonstrate that you don't necessarily have to keep saying, ooh, ah, yes, oh man, crap, oh yeah, I feel you. You can use a very down-to-earth crafted storytelling through anecdotes and analogies to connect with someone. So you can still feel grounded without sounding, in my opinion, demeaning to the other person. Like, for my purpose is that when you say, well, to be fair, oh yeah, that I always overestimate the people I interact with and then adjust down if necessary. That's what I do. So it is absolutely what I intend. So I try to see how far up they want to go. So in the future, I love to be a recipient of that too. That, like, because I think people have great stories to tell. And it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, very likely to be very difficult for someone to be able to tell a story when it's yes, you have to, oh, you know what, you have to be there, it's kind of complicated, you have to be there to understand. That is the baseline right now. Like, if you ask a middle, in my impression in my head is, if you ask a middle school student to ask to get them to explain to you, how was your day? Yeah, it was all right. You know, it's school. That, in my opinion, that may not, it's likely not going to serve you in the future when you become older. So for myself, it's time to overestimate people and see how, if they will be willing to meet me at least at a level in which explanatory English, explicit English, and maybe some infusion of emotional intelligence can facilitate us being friends, like being closer to each other, right? Like, because groundedness and relatedness have a bare minimum. When you sound like you're withdrawn or incapable of expressing anything, that is the, like, it's below the threshold. So loneliness, detachment, lack of friends, lack of mutual understanding, there's a baseline to that. The nice thing about being a child, right, when you're in elementary school, middle school, and even later high school, is that you have people in your life that implicitly know these things, right? At least I typically hope that there are loving parents, loving siblings, and by that nature, you can start to develop the necessary communication skills that will take you into a adulthood that allow you to choose, figure out, scout, and recruit people that weren't part of your life originally, right? Your significant other, friends online, right? You and I, pro call, like, the idea is that I hope that through the learning of a language or demonstrating of a language or celebrating and talking about these things, that becomes a bare minimum. I'm really talking about a bare minimum. It's really tough to hear, like, it's really tough to see, actually. You see a whole group of a chat room filled with a whole group of people who basically have the same interests. They talk about the same thing, and they don't even talk to each other. Like, they're not talking at each other. They're not talking with each other. They're talking at each other. So, like, one person would say, "Oh, I really love this game and it is awesome." And then the next person says, "Oh, I really love this game and it's awesome." And then the other person is like, "It's awesome because of this." And then the other person says, "It's awesome because of the same thing," but they're not talking to each other. Like, they're talking by themselves, like they're talking to state things, and there's no indicator to each other that they're acknowledging each other. So oftentimes, like, "I think this is right," and then someone says, "I think this is right," and then the other person maybe, like, would infer, like, "Wait, but this is right, not that." But they're not talking with that person. They're simply double downing on their statement, and then the other person would double down on their statement. So they have no communication skills with each other. It's like a shouting match. Who gets the most attention is the winner, and you vote on it with, I don't know, thumbs up. Internet stuff votes based on popularity. So then you don't ever have to discuss. I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I feel like nowadays it is a hot take. And this is the hot take. the most popular sentiment that has the most favorable support may not necessarily represent the most appropriate statement, nor does it confirm that it is true online. That is a very, I think now it's a hot take. Where like, oh, wait, what? You think that the person who has the most liked comment isn't always the most accurate and reflective of a community? Yeah, because online, think about what is not there. What is not there doesn't confirm it is not there. So, like, if you're wondering, what am I talking about? There are many people who choose to communicate when they are in the act of communication. So, when you're talking about competent, communicative people, they don't necessarily always voice in a popularity contest, right? So when you're talking about, oh yeah, this is the most upvoted comment, so it must be right, you don't know if it's the most agreed upon or even the most qualified comment. You're not accounting for absentees or people who don't click on anything, right? So and here's my little tidbit. I think people who are excellent at communication and those who are incredibly well disciplined in their level of competence, they typically don't choose a forum in which it can be overwritten by popularity. Like, you could argue, well, that's a bad and a good thing, and I'm like, yeah, and then most people focus on the bad thing. It's like, what are you saying? Are you saying that experts typically don't want to enter popularity contests and try to win by popularist reaction? Yeah, it actually is very stereotypically true. Like, when you enter a forum to communicate, one ascertains what are the chances of communication to exist. So, like, if I walk into a bar and all I see are people punching each other to communicate, it's not like I'm gonna choose to say, hey, why not? Let's go and join in the punching when I don't want to. So, regardless of what I know, and if I know better or know worse or whatever, you can't confirm what is absent. So oftentimes when people talk about, oh yeah, this is the best way to do things. Okay, out of what? Out of how many things? What is your point of reference? Because oftentimes your reference might not be anything. Like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever done for language learning. What have you done previously? Oh, I learned in high school and I absolutely hate it. So anything is better than what you have done before. So how do you know it's the best thing if anything is better than your previous experience? And then they would say, well, lots of people believe in this and and the internet has shown that this is very popular. I'm like, okay, that's a start. Now, can you imagine what is absent? And can you compare and analyze the different things about those things? What is absent and what is present, and what could be there and what could not be there? Those are the things that are absent in people's arguments. So whenever we're talking about debate, arguments and troubleshooting and the strength of your methodology, you are, in my opinion, an expert is responsible for all of it to their best of ability, not selectively rely on confirmation bias, popularism. In fact, oftentimes popularism is met with skepticism, right? Majority voice is not proportional to its validity. Like, it's confusing like it's confusing the principle of empirical observational evidence versus hearsay, right? Like subjective opinionated commentary. So oftentimes, yes, they can be seen as a converging evidence. The difference is one is collectively observable versus the other one is collectively selected, pre-selected. Like online, when you think about an opinion, there is pre-selection. Selection is not random anymore online. It's even less with every passing year. Opinions are pre-selected. They are continuously and more likely to be less reliable. And they're even the diehards of people who use aggregate scoring and stuff are now facing skepticism, right? That's a excellent routine to try to use, not as a way to like deliberately discredit aggregate scoring, being skeptical of non-random selected representation or how heavy pre-selection is a great way to like think about the language conundrum, right? Like someone would tell me, they would come up to me and say, oh yeah, Japanese is always good for Japanese games. And my first thought is like, okay, compared to what? Like, oh, compared to not Japanese. I'm like, can you tell me something that is similar that you were going to compare them with? Or are you just going to tell me what is not present in the other language that is present in Japanese? And that's your argument for it being better. That's confirmation bias. That is the gold standard of internet argument, because most things, in my opinion, now are pre-selected. Like you are watching a video because most people like you based on your data is watching that video. And then when you're being served a video, it is because you have previously watched videos that are related to the current video. All of your content, the vast majority of your content, is pre-selected. So whether it's popular or not becomes less and less relevant because it is popular for you. It is popular among the people you associate with parasocially, right? So take it with a grain of salt. I always say this with a grain of salt. I reference John Green a lot, Hank Green a lot. And then I often come with a disclaimer. Remember that you would have to share my perspective. If you share a different perspective, you are definitely more than welcome to share that. Because I need that. In my opinion, I want that. I want other people's perspective. Otherwise, I lose perspective. That's kind of the sucky part. You lose perspective online. It's crazy to say that maybe like 15 years ago when online was the wild, wild west, right? There was no algorithm-driven data tracking, self-selection for business practicalities. Now it's all of that. The vast majority of it is all of that. It's pre-selected, no exploration. Can I think of a real world example of what's happening? Look at your media. Look at movies, TV shows, and video games. The large corporate ones are the ones that you're already pre-selected to. Like a game could get a 2 out of 10 and still make billions of dollars because it's pre-selection. You are pre-selected to pay for it. What's happening right now that's really topical? GTA is coming out in November. And I can't tell you how absent, like when I look at my YouTube feed, all I can see is as though the world is saying everyone's going to play GTA 6 and they're going to pay the premium regardless of who you are. Like the algorithm is attempting to convince me that is the case. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I haven't ever played a GTA game in my life. I've watched a lot of people play GTA games, and it looks like a blast, and it's wonderful, no jab at Rockstar, but I've never played a GTA game. And the algorithm, though, could convince me otherwise if I was like an 18-year-old who's looking for the next best thing. Instantly, YouTube could convince me that I should play GTA 6. Let's go buy that $10,000 PC that I still don't have. Send money to Nvidia for an arm and a leg, and then buy that PC just to play GTA 6, and then convince myself that is the best thing since sliced bread. Right? And I sit here and I'm like, I have no intention of playing GTA 6. I do, for a fact, have intention of watching someone play GTA 6, though. This is a bit related, but also political, I can imagine, so feel free not to answer. What do you think the Carmelo Anthony case, specifically the fact that the jury contained no black people? I didn't know that. I have no comment. I imagine then Carmelo Anthony was a black person, like visibly or like officially identify as a black person. I imagine then that would be okay, then I have no comment, but other than is the jury representative of the location that the person was in? So what I mean is, since I know very little about the case, unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to look at topical cases. There's I don't want to, let's choose the neutral ground, right? Let's choose the neutral ground for this. So jury, there are two arguments of ethics and morality. I'm not a lawyer, so from my perspective, I'm thinking about selection, right? So in terms of jury selection. So jury selection occurs based on the localized area, or you can think of it as juries should be appropriated. So these things often don't align with each other. Like they're often antagonistic to each other. So because I don't know the nature of this case, one thing I would argue logically from two different perspectives. I don't have either of these perspectives because I don't have enough to determine one. But usually these are the two perspectives that you're probably going to go into when you think about politics. Are you talking about the localized representation, which can inherently be biased? So like if the person committed a crime in say a white-centric area, the jury will represent the crime happening in a white-centric location, because in the United States, jury duty is based on the location, the residence of the place the crime was produced. And then from people who might be outside as a foreigner, right? Like outside the legal system, again, not a lawyer. This is how I understand how jury selection works, right? I am part of a state's jury selection pool because I live in that state. I reside, or I'm declared residents of a state. So oftentimes the jury is supposed to represent the representation of the state's population that is in the area the crime was committed. So, and then oftentimes foreigners think of it more as though it's appropriation. So do you go and search specifically for pre-selection? And if I phrase it this way, you can see the balance. This is also bias. So now if you're thinking, okay, well, we should select the jury based on equivalent selection, that's appropriation, which you can make an argument for misappropriation. And that happens a lot with like not in terms of laws and crimes. For myself, these terms are appropriation and misappropriation for like Disney, for like social media. Like, because someone looking in would say, oh, this is an adequate representation of what is available to the country or to your country or to another country, it may be misappropriated because you're specifically pre-selecting for a bias. So a jury is supposed to be not biased either direction. So when you're misappropriating something, you're biasing it towards another angle. It can be for the defendant and against the defendant. So that is a complicated thing. Like, again, I can't really freely answer that because I don't know the context, but in both cases, it can be both bias for and against. Largely because if you think about, all right, well, white representation, what if white representation was a different type of representation? What if they are actually lenient? That is still a bias. It is like, despite if you had, like, say, a Japanese trial with all Chinese people, that still creates biases in either direction. So there, if you have a nationalistic jury versus a diversity jury, the way jury selection is done is that wherever the crime is committed, that jurisdiction, it is selected from the people who are officially residing in that location. So you could say it's bad luck, good luck, fortunate luck. It's often the argument that you're probably arguing for is appropriation, right? And for appropriation to exist, it has to also serendipitously be localized to the place the crime is committed. And that is a balance between the two. So, like, maybe they could try to look for a enrichment or a pre-selection, but in the local area. That would be a reasonable argument to say, okay, well, there's no black people in the jury. Maybe there's a local Black American community in our localized area that could serve as part of the jury selection in order to create an appropriated jury. And that's the complication of this stuff. And I agree, it can be a bit sus about the jury selection. It can be explained by coincidence and serendipity, right? A coincidence being a long history of white Americans, right? White Americans in very specific locations. So you can argue that that is the chicken or the egg that came before the chicken or the egg. So if you're committing a crime in a white neighborhood, the jury is likely going to be white, because jury selection is based on the representation of where the crime was committed. Now, I can't know that because I didn't follow the Carmelo Anthony case, and obviously we're not even going to entertain conspiracy theories of corruption, jury tampering, and all of that. The assumption is everyone's operating in good faith. And then because of good faith, what is the current system that's working? Well, jury typically prioritize localization and availability, not appropriation. Appropriation is often seen as misappropriation from an aspect of people who are not living there. So, like, I don't live wherever this is, so I can't really comment on what is appropriated representation. I don't know what it is. I could try to look at the area and see what the makeup is, and then you can compare and contrast whether there are black people there. Jury, in the United States, you want to think this is idealism. The ideal situation in the United States is that any form of representation is reflective of its region. So like the Senate is supposed to represent the state. So anything in the state. The senator is likely going to vote based on the majority representation of the state. And then the mayor on the majority of the mayoral area, the jury, and all that. So in every level of the United States, the ideal case, I'm not saying it does happen or it doesn't happen. I'm not a person who works in law or politics. The ideal case is, first, you have to determine if it actually represents the area. Then you can make an argument, in my opinion, for appropriation. And typically, the conversation often from a foreigner perspective is it's between whether it is appropriation or misappropriation. So you can call it bad luck, good luck, or circumstance, because remember that there's a long history of white American settlements. So if you're not in the city per se, like for example, if someone told me the Carmelo Anthony case occurred in New York City, and then there wasn't a single black person on the jury, that is a bit sus, largely because metropolitan areas tend to be more multicultural. Now, if it was in a suburb anywhere in the United States, the odds are you may or may not even have a jury member of a different denomination. The odds are very low. Like, that is the nature of the population distribution. So that's probably what I would say. Not that I know if it's sus or not. I would say this is what I understand about how jury is selected. Like, if, say, there's a Chinese person who has a class action suit for dealing with cross communication between China and the US, and it happened like in my state, the state that I reside in, would I be deliberately targeted for jury duty because I have some relevance to being Chinese and living as an American, right? Like I was born and raised as an American in the state. That would be appropriation. If they went out of their way to look for someone who fits the bill that is equally as racist. The idea is whoever's jury duty is up. So like whoever's time by chance is jury duty, they select juries based on that pool, is what I understand. I'm not sure how lawyers can circumvent that, where like I think what lawyers can do, this is based on social media, like watching other movies about and shows about lawyers, they can make an argument to have a jury dismissed based on sus. So if you think it's sus, the lawyers or the defendant and the prosecution can make an argument to dismiss or replace a jury member for possibly tampering, jury tampering, or bias, or introducing a case of appropriation. Generally speaking, though, jurors are selected when their jury duty is up. So at any given time, any given case, everyone has a chance of being, like, people have a rolling admissions of when jury duty is up, and then they gather all the people, and then they select anyone that can qualify at that point. So if no black person shows up for jury duty, then there will be no black people in the jury. And then if you're in an area, if they committed a crime where like 90% of the population is white, And that means that there's a 90% chance, or times, you have to do that, the 90% chance of the number of slots. Like, let's say jury duty is called for 30 people, then it's 90.9 times 30 times in a row to not hit someone that is not white, for example. Not black, not white, right? And not white is also not black, but that 10th person, that 10%, doesn't have to even be black. It could be Asian or German, or like the whole white thing, right? The white problem is that there's also Germans, Italians, and etc. So those are technically not black as well. So there are other percentages even at the low percentages. So I think that would be the most reasonable way to go about it. It's tough to know. I think if the person ended up committing a crime or allegedly, right? This is alleged because I have no idea what went down. This person who has allegedly committed a crime, there is things that law enforcement can do to move the crime and jurisdiction somewhere else that could make the jury favorable to the defendant or the prosecution. And it is in the nature of both the defendant and the prosecution to try to appropriate a fair trial. But that's not the same. In both cases, they are not fair, right? Like, if you stack the jury in your favor, despite the serendipitous nature of his local area, that's misappropriation. That would be unfair to the prosecution versus being unfair to the defendant. So either case, you can make an argument that that type of argument of morality and ethics can often be that it's unfair in both directions. So what happens is, hopefully a fair trial is represented by the encapsulation of whatever representation that exists and the system actually works. The downside is, if you look at it historically and then you account for the historical nature of things, it's never fair. And some people would argue, well, it's fair in our country. It's like, well, is your country made of 90% of a particular denomination? Because that would make it fair to everyone who's part of that denomination. And you can still present the same argument. It is likely unfair in other countries, actually, than the United States, when you're talking about the metropolitan area. Like, if you want a great case study, look at the Japanese criminal system. I have a cursory understanding of the Japanese criminal system because of video games, like because of Lost Judgment, and talking about how their trials work. I think they have an astronomically, incredibly unbelievable conviction rate. Like, the conviction rate is like 99, like something really absurd, because most people operate in the same denomination. So when you're guilty, everyone agrees you're guilty. There's no like dissonance or anything like that. So one could argue that other countries that typically view in, if they have a more representative denomination, if you look around, does everyone seem like everyone else? Because the argument and criticism outside, whenever a foreigner criticizes the United States or talk about these things, they're looking from the perspective that, do you think that conviction rate is fair? I have no idea. It's so tough to think about, because what do you think is fair? Is it fair because everyone else agrees? Isn't that what fairness is? Like, that's what I worry about. I don't work in law. I am very apprehensive about accusing people of things. So I don't really work about these. It makes me feel really uncomfortable to like blame people and take sides on these things. My opinion about the philosophy. We've been talking about philosophy, by the way. I met someone who really likes philosophy, and the idea is, what is fairness? Fairness is, to me, the colloquial understanding of fairness right now, especially online fairness, is that it serves the public. It serves the majority of the public. That's what's fair. So it's only fair if most people agree on it. Did he say who is his favorite philosopher? He didn't necessarily say who his favorite philosopher is. He did tell me the basis of the foundation of his college work. And it's a guy, it's a Hong Kong slash, like, it's kind of an international, but it's a Hong Kong person. His name was Yuk Hui is the person we discussed, and I like watched it when we talked about it. He is a he's doing a stint in cosmotechnics, the integration of philosophy of technology. You might be very interested in it, actually, Prokop, because this is a guy who's talking about the impact of philosophical behavior behind its association with technology, like how technology is developed differently with different philosophies in mind, both cultural, behavioral. I usually talk about the psychological and behavioral pragmatism with intersection of technology. So like whenever I talk about AI and whatnot, it's through the philosophy of understanding the psychological motivations of the human condition, which is a branch of philosophy. So that's why he brought up the person. And because of that, and then he shared that that is one of his foundations. This person is currently, he's Polish, or he or she or they are Polish, and they're currently finishing their double degree, I guess, in pure math and sociology. And they do have an intent of going to graduate school, perhaps to do a PhD in something related to those things. And we talked about this guy, and I watched an interview, his like basically a mission statement of what he's going to do in the future. And he talks about the intersection of philosophy and technology, which is pretty much coincidentally what brought us together in the first place later down the road, like what we ended up talking about. Because I do talk about things kind of philosophically, largely because I don't work in the area. So I don't work in the area of psychology, and I don't work in the area of AI, for example. This person specifically mentioned AI as their talking point because AI can become self-regulating now, and it can produce emergent problems that creates an area of philosophy as well. Humans are philosophical because typically to understand the human condition, one has to also take into account the propensity of self-regulation and emergent properties as humans go about. And philosophy underlies the principles that guide these things. Like, what are the chances that humans would abuse AI for profit? That is a part of philosophy, right? Like, the philosophical belief that certain countries have cultures that would prioritize pragmatism can see the movement of data generated by AI facilitated data centers as a pragmatic reason to expand, for example, versus another, like a capitalistic country. You know, the depiction of the United States could be seen as a form of like corporate offloading of working labor to a more functionally cost-effective form of self-regulating labor through the use of AI technology. That's kind of where I think this guy is going. This guy is not an English primary speaker, but they speak English with a sophistication that tells me that they can speak at a high level of English. However, their like preference seems to be elsewhere. Very much have the accent of someone in Southeast Asia, to my ears, anyways. So, in case you're wondering how his name is spelled, is this? I think this is his Cantonese. I think this is how the Cantonese is spelled, but Yukui is what I think this is supposed to represent. He does probably have a Mandarin name as well that doesn't sound anything like this, and it's not represented by these English characters, but it's this guy. He's a contemporary philosopher, so that's interesting. Very, very cool topic. It was very different, and I haven't ever listened to a contemporary philosopher. Like, I don't even know, honestly, I don't even know what philosophers are like. So it was a really fun exposure. I have a hard time finding the defining line between who is a philosopher versus who is a thinker, like a scholar. Like, for example, listening to like Cox, for example, the physicist, like listening to him, it isn't defined to me so much as a representation of philosophy, but more extrapolation and theorizing and conjecture, right? However, it can be seen, I can see it be seen as philosophy because you're talking about things that may integrate foundations of what human perception is while grounding it with maybe like some circumstantial evidence or tentative evidence for that narrative. And the lines are very blurry for me. Like, it's not like I read Plato or Socrates or Aristotle, or I haven't even read Sun Tzu's The Art of War and whatnot, and yet, hear me out, what I say doesn't stop someone from saying, oh yeah, you should read these things because that's what these philosophers talked about. And I'm like, I'm not surprised. I honestly think that oftentimes the line between a thinker and a philosopher tends to be blurred in my head. So the people I listen to, I'm not even sure they could qualify as philosopher, but they certainly sound like philosophers. Like when I hear John Green spout about his ruminations regarding the essence of Andy Warhol's work that is the topic of his new book, it strikes to me as a tangential cut into philosophy that is derived from his own personal experience. So, pretty interesting. And I might sound like occasionally someone would like make a funny remark about how I constantly talk about philosophy and whatnot, or I sound like a philosopher, and I think that's largely because I don't really know what philosophers do. Well, the conversation we had was pretty good though. I referred to the person as Mock, and it seems like they know that I talk on Twitch and YouTube, so we haven't. He's probably going on and doing his own thing at the moment. He's currently not occupied with a job at the moment, and he really likes the World Cup. So Procol, if you really like the World Cup, I mean, England is doing pretty well. He likes football. He does like football, and I am watching like the World Cup results and highlights, so I don't know how much you like World Cup. It would be, I don't think we have talked about this. Have we talked about like a international event, like a sporting event yet in our acquaintance with each other? I think the Winter Olympics happened. You love the World Cup? Is your favorite sporting event? Okay. So We started by talking about the World Cup. Yeah. So right now, the reason why he shows up at the moment is because he stays up late for the World Cup. England is doing all right. Yeah, you guys played Croatia. Yeah, I saw the draw with 0-0 to Ghana. So I like seeing the bracket proliferate, and the US, obviously the US is like one of the underdogs, right? Mark did ask me this. It's like, oh, you must, they were inferring like, oh yeah, the US made the bracket, right? US qualified the bracket, Mexico, Argentina, Germany, like slowly the group, like the bracket stages, the bracket stage, the single elimination stage is proliferating. And I told the person like who they shared they were rooting for Mexico, right? Mexico. And my thought was, I like to root for a good game. I answered this question before. I like to root for a good game. So usually that means that I root for the underdog. And at the moment in the bracket, in the ones that are in the bracket, the US is the lowest of the teams. I don't have any personal attachment to like any particular country's like football team, so it's kind of hard for me. I like watching good games. So in every respect of the nature of sports, I root that it is a very hotly contested game, that they're having the time of their lives on the field, right? So no particular country. Usually I like to elevate and cheer for the people who get suppressed, right? Like largely due to fandom. Not that it's intentional. Well, you could argue that some fandom do it intentionally, I do not like to associate with people who, in order to win, you suppress the spirit of the other team. So I do enjoy when people root for their favorite teams. That's great. I'm not the biggest fan of people who think the other team is easy or they're pushovers because they're lesser than the other. That happens quite a bit. It's kind of like language learning, right? When someone tells me, oh yeah, oh, you're going to watch that Japanese movie, don't watch it in English because it's going to be trash. That's not someone I resonate with. It's more like, oh, what language are you going to watch it in? And my answer would be like, if I like it a lot, I would watch it in both the languages. That's my perspective on things, because I want to compare and contrast them. Oh yeah, and Spain is did you see the Ghanaian witch doctor who put a curse on Harry Kane before the match, and then Kane ended up missing an easy goal? No, I did not. That's interesting. You love this World Cup so far. Spain, who were favorites to win, drew to. Yeah, I saw that. I saw the early early Spain draw. It's okay. They're coming, And then I think Portugal is doing pretty all right. Like all your standard seeds are. Were there any upsets? There was the initial South Korea, but then South Korea got popped later in the rounds. So, Japan was able to hold. So there are some really interesting ones, and I watched the highlights in those ones because it's nice to see. I love hope. Hope is fun. Sports is hope. Like, and whenever you talk about like the Spain drawing to Cape Verde, that's kind of what's elating about sports. I'm not the biggest fan on like rollovers, like being steamrolled or not rolled. So typically I do watch the World Cup for that reason, or like the Super Bowl, for example, like the American Super Bowl, or the cricket World Cup, so to speak, and the rugby World Cup, so to speak, or like cycling, the opens. Even though the tennis era is a little bit it's a lot more exciting now, the tennis era, um, the solo tennis era. But back then, the modern era of like Roger Federer, like Rafael Nadal, and Djokovic, right? That was kind of exciting, kind of not. I like when there's upstarts and people constantly filtering. Right now, the European tour is happening for disc golf, so I've been watching disc golf. Which, by the way, I met a Finnish person. I met a Finnish person once during the Neverwinter stream, and Finland is one of the largest, like if not the, you could argue, the poster child for disc golf. This World Cup has more teams in it than ever before. Also for Cape Verde and Curacao, this is their first World Cup. Oh, I did not know that. Rock, how do you? It's fine. What? Six Nations? What did they finish? I have no idea. I don't remember, unfortunately. No, ask me, am I what? Oh no, I was talking about core. Like I don't know what Curacao. Like, is it Curacao? Curacao? I have no idea how to. That name is actually a different name. Being used, like, it's a different name that I remember it by. So we talked about names, by the way. With Mark and I talked about names. Like the Turkey situation, and like the Slavic nations and whatnot. Because he's Polish, so. But I don't know how to. Corsica? No, not how to. Yeah. I don't know. People pronounce it differently. Either Croacal or Coruscant. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. The more you know. I posted that video, that short about Turkey, right? The country Turkey. And then it was by coincidence because I saw the World Cup bracket on Google, right? The World Cup bracket, and I saw that it was written Turkey, right? And then that very same day, like a few minutes later, Hank Green, his vlog was about country names, toponyms, and then that's what I brought up when World Cup was brought up by Mock, because Mock is staying up late to watch the World Cup. What are toponyms? Toponyms are topological. This is what I'm guessing. I actually don't know. I'm guessing it's topological nyms. I would say topological synonyms in a way, but it's more like just the nym part. Synonym meaning it's referring to the same thing is what I would say, but it's more like it's toponym, as in geographically this place. Like for example, China, right? China would have a toponym. 中国, the middle world, is a toponym. Nippon would be Japan's toponym. And I actually spend more time referring to Japan as Nippon outside of streaming. Like, I say Japan because most people think of Japan as Japan, but Nihongo is Nippon. They're from Nippon. And when I talk to my parents, it's Nihon. Nihon is Nippon. Nippon is how you would refer to Japanese people. So those are the toponyms. So Turkey and Turkey, you can consider it as Like, at least that's how he was applying the term. I don't actually, it was the first time I've ever heard of a toponym. So I learned by context what Hank was referring to. Obviously, we could Google it now just to make sure. The specific proper name of a geographical location or physical feature. Yeah, basically. Yeah. You love seeing all the Japanese fans picking up. Oh, you saw that too? It went viral. Super viral. Yeah, I love seeing it on a yearly, like on a base by base, because it's a tradition. It's a Japanese tradition to pick up the rubbish from their stands after a match. Yeah. Is it entirely unique in doing that? I would say yeah, probably. Largely. Did, but they're very well known for doing that. Yeah, it's a tradition. Yep. That's one of the things that are really funny about Asian culture. In this case, when someone talks about, like, I would say it's probably evident of Korea as well. However, in China, it's not. There is this often a contrast of cleanliness. Cleanliness when it comes to like physical space, and one thing that really draws a strong contrast between Chinese and Japanese culture, at least the microcosm that's in the United States, it is like transferable to the contrast in Chinese space. Like, you walk into a Chinatown, you're like, there are so many people here. They live to make do with whatever they have. And then you go to like a Korean established place or a Japanese established place, like, there's not a speck of dirt on the floor. Like, do they wipe the floor every time someone walks in, or what happened here? And then there's like, it's all arranged and spaced out. And then when you go to a Chinese place, it's like everyone is like huddled into a place. And now hear me out. These are different cultures. They're both happy. Like, it is what feels home, right? Like, if you ever look at a Vietnamese place, right? If you look at footages of people, like how people live in Vietnam, for example, like how housing works and stuff, it's like super dilapidated but homey, and like, so the idea is nostalgia and cultural appropriateness is very interesting. Like, I can't even imagine what a Chinese stadium looks like. Now, there is a big asterisk to Chinese thing. If it's like a geopolitical move, it will be spotless. So, like, what I imagine is, like, for example, the Beijing, right? The Beijing Olympics, the bird's nest and stuff probably was spotless, largely because of geopolitical pragmatism. So, the Chinese thing is like pragmatism first. So, like, oftentimes, instead of thinking about it this way, like seeing all the Japanese fans pick up after themselves, watch the incredible speed at which the Chinese people hire Chinese people to sweep across after everyone leaves. So that's kind of like the contrast, right? You can still have cleanliness, but they like represent their very stark differences. Like, if you can argue, like, well, Japanese people construct things very orderly and engineering marvels and stuff. It's like, yeah, the thing is their approach is very different, right? Like, think about the difference between open ceremonies. I love this case study. Obviously, the Olympics, I won't live that long to see as many Olympics, but you can historically go back and check out all the compare and contrast between the like labor that is involved in the opening ceremonies of each of the countries that hosted the Olympic Games. And if you look at the Chinese one, it's like a tour de force. Like, it's the most pragmatic show of brute force, like the incredible like strength of brute force. And then you have Japanese, which is often like etiquette and self-sustaining and stuff. So it's very Japanese, I would say, to see Japanese fans picking up after themselves. Meanwhile, I would imagine the Chinese version would be, hey, all right, now everyone get out. So then it would immediately get swept over and cleaned out immediately by people hired to do that. That would be like the, if it was the Chinese equivalent. Really fun little, obviously I'm a little bit exaggerating because that would make for a viral video. I do love the Japanese aspect of maintaining, like being equally responsible, collectively responsible for their thing. Chinese reminds you of the Iron Bank from, yeah, the Iron Bank from Game of Thrones. That's that's a good impression. Like, for example, if China wants something done, they get it done. But they don't necessarily get it done in the sense that everyone has equal part in it, so to speak. Like, so there's swiftness of Chinese culture. I'm generalizing, so if anyone, hopefully no one's like, I won't be too, I don't proc anyone's trigger. This is more of a generalized statement. China operates in organized pragmatism. Japanese has this like spiritualism of self-sustaining. So like a contributor by like small actions building up to long-term sustainability, like constantly taking care of your space versus, all right, we're done with this space, wipe it clean, rebuild. That's the Chinese thing. Like, all right, we're gonna build this, run it to the ground, replace it. Pragmatism, right? You use something, use it until it's broken, replace it. Chinese pragmatism. Japanese would be like, oh, okay, well, this is we're gonna try to make this last as long as possible. It's interesting. It's one of the startling contrasts that happens. About Korea, Korea is a little bit more closer to the Japanese side of things, at least from my personal experience with like secondary immigrants. Hello there, Lord. What's up? What's up? We're having a conversation. I mean, me and Procall on Twitch, having a conversation about the World Cup and like other cultures being observed through the World Cup. Are you watching the World Cup, Lord? All right. I think Korea is closer in affiliation to Japanese than Chinese. Where is Lord from? I have no idea. Hey Lord, where are you from? Do I know? I don't think we talked too much yet. All right. Good times, good times. All right. So, this is probably Baiwa, right?
日本語の勉強を始める場合はいい教科書を買わなくてはいけない。
Yeah, it was good. Hope you're doing well, Roka. What do you have going on, actually, besides playing Dead by Daylight on a Friday evening? Or, I guess, Saturday morning? Urate inai. No, ara na. Arate inai. De? Te. Te with. De? De me? Is that me? Yeah. Interesting. With a ya, oh, conjunction ya. Me ya hana. Hana nato. What is touch? Sawa? Sawate wa. Sawate wa ikemasen.
洗っていない手で目や鼻などを触ってはいけません。
At 2 a.m., it's a cool 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Wolf, are you high up or low? You've just been working full time for a door company. Okay, it was horrid this week as there's a heat wave all over Europe. Oh, okay. I've been told, yeah, MAKU was talking about the heat wave. Mark brought up climate change. And we had a bit of a discussion about climate change. And then I talked about I philosophized, like, he talked about how it should be obvious that climate change is happening for any person who's like 5 years or older, and I was philosophizing about how the human condition establishes relatives. So oftentimes the concerning aspect has to be persistent enough to be noticeable. However, it's very difficult to understand that if you're evaluating through statistical averages. He talked about like how the surface area of, like, at least in Poland, raised like 2.3 degrees centigrade over the last 50 years, that type of thing. And then I try to ground it in human perspective, like the human condition, why that is still controversial, like the whole climate change thing, despite citing things like statistical averages and objective observations, because the world we live in is run by humans, and humans run on subjectivity, like especially to the layman, right? And in order to combat climate change, it requires a tactic that creates salience among the majority of humans that isn't simply the ones who know technical and statistical observations. Like, what is 2.3 centigrade increase in surface temperature over 50 years tangibly resonating with the majority of people? Because in order to combat climate change, it requires the collective act of humans, not specifically dictation. Unless, of course, you live in an oligarchy or a totalitarian regime, I suppose you could achieve that with a person's belief, for better or for worse. Mostly due to your PC and the fact that it's hard to get airflow in your upstairs room. Oh, I see. Did he mean it's obvious that humans are significantly accelerating climate change? No, he's saying it's very obvious to see climate change is happening. You saying salience reminds you of our conversation about NetSpeak. Wait, oh, is it more prevalent now that people say salient? Palpable. I would love to see the word palpable come up more. I use salient instead of palpable a lot of times. And then tangible didn't catch on that much either. So salience is the word that I have settled on lately. They all, obviously the three of them do have their nuances. The idea is bridging colloquial English or NetSpeak. They typically generalize things, so then they would settle on one use. So salience, vivid, palpable, tangible, literally is by far the most popular. So literally means salience, palpable, tangible, sympathetic, empathetic, literally covers all of those. So whenever someone says like, man, it is literally obvious, or like, no, that's redundant. It's just like literally climate change is happening. That would be like, it's palpable or salient that climate change can be happening, right? Like that type of thing. So that's what I would say about the something being salient. Goodness gracious. He was talking about it's very obvious that climate change is happening. Anyone who lived more than 5 years can see see that climate change is happening. And my first thought was, he works in pure math and sociology, right? And then he was using statistical arguments, basically like the surface temperature and the average. And my first thought was, well, let's talk about human perspective, right? Human perspective. I gave him an analogy, like, for example, Protocol. We can use one that is a little bit more relatable to us, and I'll use a discrete analogy. When someone has depression and they have coped enough to tolerate a week that means that any particular anomaly that occurs in that week will reset that time. So my analogy was that if someone like humans operate on standards and habit formation. So if it is normal for this human tolerance to expect a week of hot temperatures and then suddenly a cold temperature happens, then they would not be convinced that climate change is happening. Because oftentimes humans get destabilized and reset on the way they think things have happened over time. It's one of the human conditions that I believe is completely salient. That's why we have record keeping. That is why we record history, take pictures, write in our journals, because humans' aspect when it comes to the subjectivity of change over time is not felt in the same time frame. So when you say 2.3 degrees centigrade increase of the average surface temperature over the last 50 years, it is incredibly difficult for any single human being to comprehend how that feels, like the salience of it, let alone expecting the general population to, be able to feel that. So, and I use the anecdote, a personal anecdote of something like, okay, well, you feel really upset 6 out of the 7 days of the week. That is your your normal habit. If it becomes sustainable, it is your normal tolerance. So you only need one good day in a week to tolerate. 6, 7. I know. It's, we should change the weeks of the day now. It should be 8 days a week, okay? Just for that, we're changing 8 days a week. Monday is 2 Mondays are in a week now. I'm kidding. So anyways, yes. So the idea is when Mark was telling me it's obvious that climate change has happened for anyone who's 5 years old. Well, the obvious evidence is that it isn't obvious, right? Because climate change is still controversial and is very difficult, despite programs that are trying to hit habit formation to contribute to mitigating climate change. Now, besides the obvious evidence that it isn't obvious, if it was obvious, we wouldn't have this discussion, right? There wouldn't be a problem in mitigating climate change, and then wouldn't need the urgency to constantly, progressively accumulate evidence to encourage that climate change exists or it's happening, right? That's besides the point. Now, because of that, I wanted to create a humanistic way of thinking about why that is the case. So I was proposing habit formation because that's what I focus on. So how do I know this happens with regularity with real things, despite climate change being a real thing, but that concept of climate change is very detached, right? You can use depression, you can use abuse. I talked about like relational aspects and stuff. There's a reset time. So despite like if you went through the desert, right? Like you had 7 days, like a hot heat wave that lasts a week, and then the next day is very cool, our memories consolidate. So what happens is it can reset our perception of something that has occurred very often. It's kind of like taking a hit of something after years of sobriety. You can forget the entire extent of your sobriety at one lapse. So, or things like it's okay to always buy things you can't afford when one of the days you can afford to buy something, or you can buy something, right? Like things don't seem expensive if at least one of the days you can afford the thing. That's kind of one of those things. humans normalize tolerance based on habits, and it happens incredibly frequently, and it happens on a scale much more rapid and frequently than the scale of climate. So in order to circumvent that, or to help us educate ourselves in that, we use technology, right? Writing, recording, science, that type of thing helps ground our subjectivity in objectivity. It is detached, though. That's kind of the tough part. Not everyone works in a field that requires that type of maybe association. That also applies to habits, both self-destructive and self-progression. Yeah, pretty much like what I talk about was I was trying to ground it in the philosophy of the human condition, because that is relatable to humans, most things. Empirical data is not inherently relatable to humans. The whole idea of objectivity is to remove the subjectivity from objectivity. So when you're thinking about a populace, like an entire community of people trying to act benevolently in climate, then it's tougher, because you're not assuming that humans default to pure objectivity and empirical evidence. That is something humans use to create decisions that are bound, less influenced by subjectivity, at least in my opinion. Do I have a definition of climate? No, I really don't. Like, climate, I really don't. Like, it's tough. Like, climate is not just temperature. However, the conversations that I have in this case, the conversation I had with Mark, it is defined by temperature. So, like, in this very case, I do have a definition of climate. The example that I had with Mark is that the only definition is temperature. And even more specific than that is the average surface temperature across a period of time. And that's where I tackled the argument. Which, by the way, Mark also introduced, self-doxed himself, and he said that he's a national level debate champion or something, like a national debater. Drama was around when we were talking, because Drama and I also have a lot of like debates and arguments and discussions, and we were kind of like being a little like taking jabs at each other about how we debate. I'm not a national level debater, by the way. I wasn't even part of the debate team. Generally speaking, most of my debating and discussion came as a consequence of defending my thesis. So, like, I got humbled at every single turn of my scientific career. Like, legitimately, all of that humbling was what shaped my ability to look at things both subjectively and objectively when it comes to like discussions and debates. And then obviously I'm mentioning this because you and I have a very similar relationship, right? Like earlier we were just talking about the qualifications of jury selection, whether it's appropriation or misappropriation, and also like localization, right? That seems to be prevalent in previous government financial benefits in some cases. It seemed to be ineffective to just hand out money to the poorest with no support. Exactly. Exactly. That's the tough part. Like, as much as humans, like for example, if objectivity is so grand, right? Is so grand, what is it that keeps humans from embracing objectivity? We know some of the ramifications of pure objectivity. In fact, there are like fairly decent case studies of cultural homogeneity of hyper objectivity in a microcosmic way in like aspects of specific countries, like Japan, for example. Like the objectivity of marriage and progeny. So that is what creates politics in my opinion. That is what creates your jury selection argument. It is at the interface of objectivity and subjectivity. Morality and ethics require that it is a balance between objectivity and subjectivity. And when I was presenting my case, my answer or my response or consideration for the jury selection process, I was weighing both your perspective and the perspective of appropriation, which deals with subjectivity, and the serendipitous nature of jury selection, which is objectivity, right? Surely, no matter the period of time, you cannot deny climate change unless you define a bar that the climate has to change above. Yep. If you define what you feel as the defining line of climate change, then you can deny climate change. There is pure subjectivity. There isn't pure objectivity. So we might have to keep that in mind for the nature of humanity. While there may not be pure objectivity, subjectivity exists by a default, right? When it comes to the human condition. So when you say, surely no one can deny climate change, subjectivity can deny climate change. We wouldn't be having this conversation otherwise. You also think that pure objectivity cannot advocate or support the existence of anything? It really can't. Pretty much, it really can't. It can't argue for the value of anything. It can't even argue for the pragmatic application of a technology, right? Which goes back to the whole Yuque, that philosopher. Technology is not inherently purely objective, right? It is at the interface of philosophy and technology. Subjectivity motivates the development of technology. When someone argues technology is a purely objective state, basically you see a problem, you invent something to solve that problem. It can't be a problem if there isn't a subjective nature to it. How do you determine what is a problem? It's subjective to humans. Problems are subjective to humans. Climate change is seen as a subjective problem to humans. To some humans, you would like to argue to most humans at the time of this discussion, and not to some, because if you're trying to make a relative, if you're trying to say surely matter of period, well, what about flat Earth? Right? Rough, right? It's a very topical discussion to this day. So, situationally, subjectivity comes with a filter. Yeah, I know. Yeah. You said period of time. Oh, you mean surely no matter the time period. Oh, you mean an epic? I think you're still fine. Period of time and time period, I think I'm interpreting them as synonyms. So that might be a Japanese-Chinese thing. I'm not entirely sure. But period of time and time period for me, I think I'm interpreting it the same way. Unless you totally mean it's not what I'm referring to. How does flat Earth put a cog in the wrench of definition climate change with... No, it's an analogy with the time period. It's not semantically related. It's the relationship and connection is about the argument of subjectivity being used to deny empirical evidence. What do you think is more definitive? Climate change or a spherical Earth? And then we're both having this discussion because subjectivity exists, right? So I'm trying to give you asked, unless you define a bar, right? A threshold of belief. Well, I would say there are other examples. We don't necessarily have to talk about climate change, how subjectivity can create filters. I'm not gonna only beat down, like kick a dead horse when it's down situation. Like that's the perspective that we might be biased towards. Let's use my own personal anecdote. Sometimes I really want my experiments to work, right? And I could convince myself that the experiment is working according to plan, only to find out that I have hyper focus on an aspect of the experiment that overlooked something that completely invalidated its approach. So despite my better judgment of my objectivity and maybe like fail safes and even my colleagues' peer review, there are aspects of my experimental methodology that created erroneous lines of thinking due to my subjective nature in hyperfocusing, right? Hyperfocusing is an example where despite being hyperfocused and objective, you can still be selectively subjective about what you think is important, which the center core about this is what is a problem? What is more important to focus on? All of those nature is by far the essence of being human. If we reject that part, what are the motivations to do anything? And now we're talking about philosophy again. Like, what is the motivation to do anything? Like, we could choose never to write history down. Objectively, it would save a lot of time, and it could solve a lot of problems by pretending there are no problems. It's really, like, I think we should it's good to embrace that. It goes back to our discussion about, is science a belief, right? Like, does science require belief, right? The whole thing with Peterson, right? It's very tough to distinguish because we can't be not us. We can't be something we're not unless you really want to try to do that. I'm not the greatest person to ask what it's like to consistently reject my humanity. Like, I'm not here to spend the rest of my life hating myself for being human. I know there are other people who prefer, like, there are some people at any given time, right? At any given time would love to reject their humanity. Like, why do I have to feel sad when I fail? For example, like, anytime there's grief, things that remind you of your humanity, there are good things and there are bad things. And oftentimes the bad things are the times when people have that momentary thought, why do I have to be human? Why do I have to feel sad for myself when I fail? Right? And for myself, I guess I go to philosophy. Not that I read philosophy, but I go to the thought of, well, when I'm sad, one day I can be happy. They're entwined, they're together. So how do we do that for climate change? That would be the great question. How do we create something that is salient, that is a constant reminder, that can encourage and make it possible for humans to feel the impact of climate change saliently, and also know that their actions create a visible or noticeable or feeling impact. That's actually kind of the toughest part, in my opinion, about climate change solutions, because you're saying, like, hey, I should give up my lifestyle. For what? That is like the toughest human problem that face politicians and policymakers. Like, all right, can you give up using your car for like the rest of your life, please, so that we can contribute, and then expect everyone else to give up the use of their car? Oh, can you decrease your consumption year over year as opposed to increase your consumption year over year? Right? Human condition. Humans are they consume. We exist. In order to exist, we have to consume something. So if you're gonna really lean in on the like climate change thing, one of the underlying human conditions you have to address is how do you get the whole population of the planet or even your remote location that you govern to consume less in general. Because one way to address that habit formation, like the core of habit formation, is to get your overall consumption to get lower, or you try to use technology to promote more efficiency. Now, we already talked about the other human condition though. If you produce more energy, what do you think humans will do? They will probably consume more energy. So it's a incredibly tenuous, consistent move forward. So if I had a romantic way of talking about philosophy and scientific inquiry at the interface of politics, is that we'll always keep having problems. And the goal is to consistently keep adjusting to the new problems. And that is humanity's philosophy. For me personally, like what I mean is, I'm not a person who's going to view it purely objective, right? We already talked about pure objectivity, right? That there is a pure objective solution that is perfect for a problem. Humanity is subjective. So over time, the nature of the problem will consistently change. Climate change of today will not be the same as the climate change of tomorrow, which is the climate change of the awareness of that creates the change that adapts to it. So to embellish that is to keep on curating humans to want to solve problems. And that comes to my own mantra that I would die by. Like, this is the mantra that I would die by. Humans should not lose the ability to solve problems. Period. Because no matter what, humans are the source of the problem, and they are the source of the solution that will create a new problem, and the cycle continues. And humans should never lose the capacity to solve problems, or even the motivation or the incentive to better themselves. So to lead into what you just said, do I support nuclear energy? If not, what source of energy would you prefer to be the majority of energy generation? Anything that is currently better provocatively than the current one. So whatever our arguments are, whatever energy source, those experts will perpetuate and try to develop technologies that will address the current problem, right? And then when I am no longer of this world, there will be other sources of energy, which comes with other sources of problem, which tackles another source of the energy. So this is kind of more running parallel of what I live for. I live for to see all the problems that humans create and also solve. So, or all the existing problems that I didn't create, like my generation didn't create, but we saw from the previous generation only to create new problems for the future generation. That to me is the human subjectivity and objectivity, like, I don't know what you call it, a paradox. When you solve a problem, you create a new problem. I know that some people will say, well, that sucks. Why would humans want to live that way? And my first thought is, yeah, you have to go to philosophy for the answer for that one. Like, why do you think humans live the way they are? Their memories and their emotional. To me, this is how I reconcile how memories and biology works with technology and whatnot. Humans are cyclic because they don't pass on experiences, and they are cyclic in the way that they remember things. They are cyclic in the way that they solve problems and like get elated. They're temporally restricted. So humans are temporally, in every sense of the word, not objective. They're temporally not objective. I mean, we could make this a slight generalization to Einstein and his theory of relativity and how time is relative and all that stuff. That's besides the point. It is, in my opinion, a very romantic way to live things. Not everyone has to prescribe to my particular perspective on life. I think one of the greatest gifts that humans have is also its greatest weaknesses, right? Humans can solve problems through a combination of objective and subjective means, only to create more problems, of which it creates its perpetual nature forward. It is, in fact, one of the most poetic ways of arguing the meaning of life. Like, what do humans do most of their lives? Try to solve the problems they believe are problems. And then how do they keep going? By solving those problems to get the elation, only to then seek and create, possibly, and contribute to the next problem. Like, for example, a life of luxury is climate change. Like, you might not think of it this way, but when you have finally made it to solve and consume to your greatest delight, you can contribute to the excessive consumption culture of humanity. So, like, where there's one thing, there's another thing. And it's interesting that this will continue. I like to think that this will be perpetually forward. Otherwise, there is one solution to all of this. And I'm going to make an anime reference. It sounds really morbid and black comedy if I don't preface that this is an anime example. The supervillain that wants to annihilate the human race. That is the permanent solution. There will be no problems because there will be no humans pointing out any problems anymore. You eliminate the human race. Then there are no problems. There aren't going to even be people who can conceive problems. Right? That's kind of the thing. So, like, if you're wondering what I may prescribe to is that I exist, I'm human, so I will see problems and I'll try to solve them and I'll create new problems. The inevitable, objective, perfected solution to ending a problem is the source of the problem. That's humanity. Humanity is both the source of the solutions and the source of the problems. So you remove the source. You remove humanity. And, you know, by the way, I've been watching way too much Supernatural, and, like, I've been watching so many sci-fi lately, and that's kind of the talk that you think about. Like, how do you remove the source of the problem? You could remove the source of identifying the problem too. Humans identify the problem through their subjectivity. They determine what problems there exist. So if you remove humanity, there isn't anyone to even determine if there is a problem with the system. It's crazy. I understand. So I want to paint this in a very auspicious light and hopeful light. Humans create problems. They also create solutions. It is, without a doubt, the most tragic thing that would happen is when humans stop learning how to solve problems. Like, you and I will cease to stop thinking there is a problem. That is a loss of a humanity's quality. Like, not being able to see problems, see bad and good things, that is a rejection of humanity. You have rejected subjectivity. So inevitably, there wouldn't be any problem if you have no subjectivity, and there wouldn't be any solutions or improvements because there shouldn't be any motivation to do so. Right? Objectivity simply be like, what? I don't understand. What is a pure objectivity of existence? You just exist? I have no idea how to make an argument of just existing. Like, the moment you start thinking like a human is the moment you say, well, we want to make the earth a better place. That's subjectivity. How do you know, how do you make earth a better place? The moment you ask you want to make something a better place is the moment you'll have humanity injected again with multiple perspectives. Like, what is a better place? What is a better earth? What is better for the universe? That's kind of the, we can't divorce ourselves from our humanity, at least in my opinion. Like, the greatest of science fictions is often not void of humanity because the person who wrote the science fiction is a human being. So despite trying to write a hypothetical entity that has no subjectivity in their line of thinking, it's still relatively very hard to personify something that has no aspect of humanity. Like, for example, the Odyssey, right? You have gods and like the four horsemen. So like supernatural is, I watch way too much Supernatural lately. So all the representations of pure things like pestilence, greed, lust, they're still injected with other aspects of humanity. Like, it's very hard to divorce yourself from the foundations of having pure something, right? So it's such an interesting philosophical question. Is that your way of saying you aren't educated enough to feel comfortable to say which energy source you support the most? No, not really. I think nuclear energy is pretty solid. From a pragmatically, slightly subjective sense, I think more so from a pragmatic sense, nuclear energy is disproportionately solving a exponential scaling problem of energy usage for the time being. And then I would argue 10 years down the line, energy usage is going to go up exponentially due to the increased availability of energy, and then we would have to seek a new energy source. And then when you say nuclear energy, I'm specifically talking about fission energy right now is very appropriate, but in the future, nuclear energy in a way of fusion, possibly cold fusion, in the future would offset another scaling thing. Then we have to consider if I'm going to be alive later down the road to like layman understand enough of another source of energy that maybe is both constructive, like destructive and constructive simultaneously, or something like that, that can create an even more higher scaling form of energy, or the heat death of the universe happens. Before that occurs, before the scaling and upscaling of fission transition into cold fusion, because I can't perceive any more than this, right? And then maybe dark matter. We'll just go into dark matter, like cold fusion into whatever dark matter turns into, right? And I don't expect myself to live long enough past even cold fusion. So even then, perhaps by then the heat death of the universe already occurred. Who knows, right? So that's kind of my thing. I think nuclear fission, right? Fission energy can address the scalability problem if we're calling for scalability of the energy. If that is the focus, the subjective focus of scaling an energy source that's producing disproportionate amount of output that address the constant scale up of energy consumption. And right now, AI infrastructure and data centers would be a great example of that, right? Meanwhile, you probably read the article about the Chinese trying to rehash an experiment of putting data centers in using the ocean as a natural cooling source again, like resurrecting that project and then executing it for a data center. Yep. Humans. Ever fascinating, ever pushing forward, and ever normalizing. Like, if you give me more things to use, I will use more of those things. Like, I'm not excluding myself from this equation. Like, if someone comes up to me right now on this day and say, hey, I'm going to give you $1 million to transform your content creation. I will do it. And then it will become my new norm. Like, I'm not immune to normalizing more resources, because that how I utilize that resource will be obviously conditioned to my own particularity. Like, how will I use the $1 million? It will be scaled to me, but then I would be able to adjust to that new threshold immediately. Like, for example, the internet usage, I have scaled to the internet usage. In what nature is the internet serving me and being used by me may vary. You have noticed when you clip your stream, it auto adds subtitles? Yeah. Isn't that great? YouTube does that too. Actually, YouTube localizes all those things now too. Soon, all of these resources will be scaled, right? Like, think about all the stuff we've scaled already. Smartphones. I kid you not, I have a colleague when I was in graduate school who did not have a smartphone. And in the moment he got his first smartphone, he scaled to it in a week's time. Because if you are given a device as a human being, you will maximize the investment. Like in a subjective or an objective way, humans scale to the resources they are provided or given, because in my opinion, I do naturally believe it's both the strength of humans and also the weakness of humans, right? So, like, how do you stop a human from overeating? Take away the food. Or develop, obviously I'm being facetious. You can develop another habit that can form competing with that habit. So, like, my approach is to do an activity that is competitive with eating. And how you approach that is usually lean on subjectivity, not objectivity, a lot of times for someone who isn't inclined. If someone is inclined in the skill, you can lean on objectivity because their competence will guide some of that objectivity's weight. So, for example, when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to go out to watch a movie," and I'm like, "I really like enjoying reading this book. Come read with me." You're creating a competitive process for the resource of that stuff. So when it comes to that climate change thing, right? Or even the Japanese routine thing, the subjectivity weighs very powerfully despite the objective incentive, like cleaning up the rubbish after yourself in based on the Japanese tradition. That tradition elevates even the pragmatic incentive of understanding that if you distribute the responsibility across a larger subset of people, you're distributing the requirement of the effort, right? So that means it requires a less of a payment from each individual person doing it versus an entire entity or one person concentrated in that responsibility of doing it. So that was my contrast between like the Chinese approach, pragmatism, like pure pragmatism, and then like, not really like pure. Again, we already made an argument about pure objectivity, but more so inclined. Like, it would be more efficient to get one machine to do it at one time to clean the entire thing. However, then all of the effort and consumption is focused into that one task. In Japan, that tradition was spread across all the people. So at that case, all the people required to sacrifice a smaller expense. So in a way, it can still agree with human condition. If I do this for 1 minute and everyone else, like 5,000 other people, do this for 1 minute, then I don't have to do this if I wanted to be responsible, or someone be responsible for 5,000 minutes of something. So efficiency, right? Still find ways to go about it. And for myself, that's what happens with humans. Humans find a way to scale up. Cue your typical like science fiction where humans constantly spiral in consumption. Like, you know, they're both self-destructive and exponentially growing, right? It's kind of like if you challenge the human species to survive, it will double down on surviving. It's one of the essences of humanity. It's robustness, its hardiness, and at the same time, it is built. It's kind of a chicken or the egg question. Like, is it because humans constantly create problems or see problems that leads to their robustness, or is it that the challenges that humans face led them to develop robustness and normalization of the challenges that they see henceforth? Such a interesting chicken or the egg philosophy question, right? Like, humans are incredibly robust. You can hear it a lot in science fiction and like fantasy a lot. Humans are parasites, right? Very, very strong parasites. And then they can also be panaceas, very, very strong, vigorous problem solving machines. So which came first? Is it because there are so many problems that humans see, or are challenged with so much problems of existence, or the other way around? They see a lot of problems and therefore they became great problem solvers, only to develop more problems from that problem solving. Pretty fun, like perpetual machine of ideas for like content creation and media. I'm euphemizing this. So for the record, I am making this a euphemism. I genuinely believe in the good nature of humans. Despite humans generating more problems by generating more problems by solving more problems, I think that is what, personally, in my opinion, I feel that is attached to the meaning of life. For me, or what I think is one of the parts of humanity's meaning to life. Solving problems, creating more problems to solve problems, and continuing to persist without ever evolving, ever waning. Sometimes problems even go back to old problems in a new context, right? We can drive cycles of problems and solutions over and over again. We can even revisit the same identical problem only to come up with a new solution, like a different solution from the first time we encountered the problem. Have you seen the Chinese tradition of sharpening a rod of steel against a rock, not as a practical way to sharpen, but a display of perseverance? I have. Yeah. This the name of this is actually an idiom. I forgot what it exactly means. Hang on. Let me see what characters they ended up using. Pretty sure this is an idiom. Like the name itself, that process is an idiom. I do see the first thing is probably iron. Hold. Something like in, please. Tie 铁杵磨长香长江 iron rod ground into a needle. Yeah. So the idiom would be something like like the constantly dripping wears away the stone, like corrosion. Like, for example, if you drop water into the rock, that constant water dropping will eventually even wear away the stone. So like perseverance, right? Like if you keep on doing something, you will eventually do it. It will still you will still be able to achieve it. So, I'm guessing you brought that up because what I'm describing sounds kind of like that too, right? Like that's kind of a great way. I'm not sure if that's where you were going, but there's a parallelism to what I've been saying about the human spirit. That's the human spirit. Humans are a display of perseverance across like where there's a problem, you just keep going. Where there's a problem, you just keep going, right? Patience, perseverance can accomplish all things. And I mean, it might not be a coincidence because I'm Chinese, right? Like what I mean is my parents are Chinese and they instilled these things to me. So patience, perseverance, you got this. And where there's patience and there's perseverance, there's consistent problems. And when there are consistent problems, it is through patience and perseverance that you can keep on living. You can keep on going. And if you're wondering, like, where do I get this soppy mannerism that I have whenever someone says they can't do something? Same deal. It's that same deal where I don't want people to give up. Like, humanity doesn't give up. I try to basically, as much as I can, pull on the idea to remind the person that they're human. You will experience sadness. You will experience happiness. The idea is that collectively, the greatest gift of life is perseverance. So much of all the things, and if you're wondering, well, doesn't that just defeat all the reason to argue and discuss things? Nah, that's part of the fun. Why not live it up, right? So if we have problems, we talk about them. And then if we have solutions, we talk about the problems they could create. We also talk about the problems they solve, right? Otherwise, humans will drift. Like you will lose purpose. I'm starting to sound like I'm talking about the philosophy of life. And genuinely speaking, I'm not a philosopher, so I don't even know if that's close to what someone says. It's very coincidental. And like when someone's in tune with their, I don't know, meaning of life to sound like a philosopher, because I genuinely do not give up on the human spirit. You do not give this up. Like, quote unquote, it's kind of similar to like where there's a will, there's a way. And we're not talking about where there's a will, there's a perfect solution. Where there's a will, there's catharsis in the human spirit, so to speak. When you try, despite failing or succeeding, you have gained the quality of perseverance. Like, perseverance is not the same as success, right? You can be successful and fail in the act of perseverance. They are consequences of perseverance. Life is to persevere. So you don't give up. You don't give up at all. If you can't have this, go a different direction. You know, if you can't have climate change, you know, if you can't solve climate change, oh, sure as heck we're gonna find some other way to scale up and I don't know, change the uniqueness of climate change or something like that. Do you think humans are unique in their ability to persevere? I don't think so. I don't think so. Do you think I would make a fairly competent argument that humans have a way of communicating, like have unique ways of communicating perseverance that maybe other living things do not. However, I think it's very difficult to ignore. Like I'm like trying to think how I can't see perseverance. Now you might argue, well, you're human, that's why you see perseverance in other things like dogs and animals. You see perseverance maybe because it's the consequence of humans. Like you could even see perseverance in plants, right? The way living things are designed, they are constantly trying to find a way to consume and live, right? Chemotaxis in like bacteria, um photosynthesis driving directional plant growth to survive. When trees get too tall, somehow weeds will find their way to sunlight. So like they're living things they live because they need to persevere in their livingness. So is it because I'm human that I see it that way? You could make an argument for that too. Like when I see a plant, like you see, you like The Last of Us, like for example, like post-apocalyptic world, and then you see weeds everywhere. Is that considered perseverance? Because it's plants trying to grow in a harsh environment despite, I don't know, a nuclear holocaust or something like that. That's a unique property. Like you could argue, yeah, maybe that is the unique property of humans, being able to persevere and see perseverance in other things. I think it's more so the unique property of humans being able to express it or show it or see it. Other living things have what seems like perseverance because however, they don't have any unique way of presenting it to us, like presenting to other people. Yes, the body of water experiment. They also did that with dogs too, back when unethical treatment was less of a red tape. Yeah. They didn't do it with the water, they did it with the shocking floor. Yeah, these are classical behavioral psychology, like historical behavioral psychology experiments. Hope and despair experiments. Do animals experience hope and despair? Because it deals with perseverance. So when you constantly remove the body of water, eventually the rat gives up. And that's also the same as the dog shocking thing. So they had an electrified floor, and the dog would react when they're getting shocked, and eventually the dog simply lies on the floor and gives up, even though the shock continues. Yeah. So animals do feel hope, despair, which is tied to perseverance. They do give up hope. So, and you could argue from a objective standpoint, it could be a neuronal adaptation, which that is a very inhumane way of looking at things. So humans have a natural, you could say, a unique ability to see all of the qualities that they have in other things too. So does that mean they have those things? It's kind of hard to tell. I don't really know. You can't, you would need someone else to tell you that, right? Like some other human, like non-human thing to tell you if you're seeing what you want to see in it. But yes, rats, dogs, many other animals back in the day when there were, right, historically when scientists did not have large considerations yet about the humane treatment of experimentation, these experiments have occurred multiple times. Yeah. They give up or they get exhausted. Happens. There was that study where a rat, so what you wrote was there was that study where a rat was placed in a body of water, and if left alone they swam for about 15 minutes and then stopped. But when the scientists took the rats out of the water at just before exhaustion, then after put them back, the rat swims for 60 hours. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Hope, despair, perseverance. And also, by the way, that rat swimming thing, you might have noticed that I already described that about humans, where you can learn to tolerate something and it requires a different event that can reinstill hope and coping. 15 minutes to 60 hours is just insane. Someone can study for a month and they get burned out, and they can come back and study for a lifetime. Isn't that crazy? Like, what I mean is, it does scale up. It does scale up to humans. So, like, someone who met, someone who originally failed to do something, and they managed to come back to it, they're more likely to exponentially do that even longer. Pretty neat. It's and here's another thing. You might be thinking, well, they came back to do it longer because they learned from their mistakes, right? It's not, it doesn't have to. They could just come back and do the same thing for a longer period of time because their tolerance is normalized to the last time they did it. And you don't know when the next threshold is. You don't know that the threshold would be an addition or a subtraction or a synergistic thing. Like, and it can happen the other way, by the way. Like for humans, it can happen the other way, where something bad happens and the tolerance goes out the window. So like your tolerance for someone's activity was 50 minutes. So the next time your tolerance could be 1 second. Like you had a bad like someone lied to you, for example. Someone lied to you. So the next person, you're probably gonna cut them off. You're gonna think they're lying before they even speak. Like after 60 out, after a 6-year relationship, someone betrayed you. The next relationship, it could last like 5 minutes. So the opposite can happen too, which is it's crazy thing about humans. I'm not sure about animals. I don't know the opposite has happened where like you probably can. The best example, analogous example I can think of is electric fences. Which is again another animal related thing. We could use it to talk about humans, which is also inhumane too. So like electric fences. You can have like an animal that spent like 5 years I don't know, doing whatever it wants, like moving anywhere, knocking over fences. And you can install electric fences and it would take like less than a week or maybe even the first encounter to undo 5 years of conditioning. That's the closest thing. This is the reason why I'm saying this is I recently watched Clarkson Farms. And one of the ways to protect protect like lambs and stuff is very early on when they're like young and stuff, you would put up an electric fence and then they would learn by hitting the electric fence and then immediately it never happens again. And the idea, and obviously the electric fence is to prevent like foxes and stuff from eating the lamb when they're free ranging. So it's like both deterrence and in both ways. And that is kind of one of the craziest thing. Like it's astonishing how certain effects can create things. Like for example, you ate Taco Bell and in like 10 minutes you had diarrhea. And you never eat Taco Bell for the rest of your life. This is an actual thing. One of the most visceral things is like the Garcia effect. So one moment disproportionately in time creates a lifetime reinforced habit. Right? Here's one, drinking. How an acute thing leads to a chronic thing. So drinking, if your first drinking experience is you drank for 5 minutes, the shorter the time frame, the more violent the outcome. Right? Now we're talking about intensity, right? Intensity, it can be for a lifetime. Like people are completely dry for the rest of their life because the very first experience they had was so acute and so violent that it never happens again. So we're talking about something that's disproportionately like a moment in their life, and then we're comparing it to years, not even minutes to hours, but minutes to 10 decades. Pretty astonishing stuff. But these are anecdotal, so we're not talking about human experimentation. So most of the stuff that I'm citing is not in controlled environments, and it would be unethical to try to test whether those two things are the same thing. So we have to make sure. What do you mean? You're so surprised I watched Clarkson Farms? It's one of the, like, Clarkson Farms is amazing. It's so wonderful. It's an intersection of so many things. I also watch all of Grand Tour, so I already mentioned that. When you brought up like QI, right? QI, and then someone. Are you the one that also brought up Taskmaster? No, it was Gecko was the one that brought up Taskmasters. When he brought up Taskmasters and you brought up QI, I brought up Clarkson Farms and Grand Tour because of the British connection. Yeah, Clarkson Farms is amazing. This recent season, absolutely, it's so peak to me. I'm starting to sound like Gen Z. The show is currently at its peak. Unfortunately, it ended on a cliffhanger, and you're wondering, wait, a documentary style show, it ended on a cliffhanger? There's a cliffhanger, and the cliffhanger is like, we won't know until next year. So Clarkson Farms is real time. It's a documentary, basically. Each passing year is each passing year. So it's every year at the farm. So until we get to the end of 2026 into 2027, won't know what happened to Clarkson and his peeps. It's fantastic. The reason why I watch Clarkson Farms is because I grew up in a farming state. The comment that I made in that Discord about country roads, I really do mean by that country roads thing. I have an affinity for relating to people who are farmers and agriculture. In fact, it's kind of a romantic gesture to maybe do something like that. It is also tied with restaurants. So like the whole idea of farming and preparing food, that stuff is incredibly quaint and beautiful. And it's actually something I inherited from what most people don't think about, in my opinion, outside of the United States, and that's the farming culture, the agriculture in the United States. And Clarkson Farms, that's also the main topic in Clarkson Farms in the UK. The constant washover and marginalizing of the farming community. Yeah, that's still obviously happening in the United States too. It's something that is felt very real. Like I grew up around people who actually farm for a living and also farm for a hobby or farm for sustainability. So people have, like, you might be thinking, okay, well, Clarkson Farm, what do they cover? They cover all of that. Clarkson is a very liberal person, like a liberal in thought. So what do people like me that grow up around people, honeybees, right? Like harvesting snails. There are like various things that are also part of farming. We have to keep in mind that farming isn't simply planting fields of wheat and barley and whatnot. There's also the farming aspect that involves gardening and sustainability, like chicken farming, pigeon fowls, or is that what they're called? My boss, my former graduate boss mentor, she has chickens. She likes chickens. I always thought it would be fantastic if I could own some land and raise some chicken. Chickens are adorable. Pigs are adorable too. Like, animals in general are really, really curious, fascinating things. Clark, you see a side of, in my opinion, you see a side of Clarkson that his game went up, in my opinion, from like the hats off to Clarkson. And I'm gonna spoil this anyways. You're probably gonna hear about this as well. Clarkson has cancer. So like he's like working with a cancer diagnosis right now. If you type his name in, you'll probably find that out. And you know, from his days at Top Gear, I didn't watch a lot of Top Gear, occasionally. And then he started Grand Tour with like James May and I'm forgetting what the short guy's name is. Hammond. Yeah, Hammond. I've got his first name. But anyways, May, Hammond, and Clarkson, right? Watch all of Grand Tour. And it was a fantastic program. I have an automobile background because I grew up in the in a state, or in the United States, when you grow up in like a suburbia area, whatnot, one of the hobbies is cars and more cars, especially like fossil fuel cars. So I enjoy Grand Tour because of those shenanigans. And it's a different perspective because they're all British, right? So then he upped his game. Clarkson Farms, in my opinion, exceeds Grand Tour. Personally, that's probably a really big hot take, because now it's talking about livelihoods, lifestyles, the interface of human agriculture with preservation and technology that deals with the earth, nature. So it Clarkson Farms progressively became about the appreciation of farming while sustainable farming and whatnot. So the recent like 1 or 2 seasons, it is that blue collar life that I personally, my parents know much more about than me. I've never actually had a blue collar job in the field, so I've never been a craftsman in my life. However, I've been surrounded with craftsmen. Like, the vast majority of people's families and parents that I interacted with, they were craftsmen, like mechanics and basically farming. It was farming. Like, my backyard where I live is more farms than actual farms occupy more land mass than anything else. And it's kind of neat. It was fun. Like, the last season, it was about modern technology. He introduced this really interesting, fully sustainable green, like floating like dairy farm in the middle of one of the metropolitan areas in the UK. Like, I forgot where though. But it was so amazing what technology can do. So, and then they talked about like drone access and how sophisticated now farming can become. They went to like Netherlands and took like examples of the new high-tech stuff where they can program things to spot farm and manage areas through profiling the entire fields. That's so awesome. Yeah, you can appreciate that. Anyways, maybe not sponsored, by the way. And also, Clarkson Farms is an Amazon thing. Hopefully, there's going to be another season. I really look for it. He opened a bar, like a pub, which is linked to the farm. So it's constantly about the sustainability. So self-sustainability of localized things. Because one of the biggest detriments of current food supplies and whatnot is the transportation and the spoilage of food supplies, as well as food waste. So the recent season involved food waste as well. Spoilage and waste are tied hand in hand. So pretty neat. And then by side effectiveness, I do hear a bit about government policies in the UK regarding agriculture, which very much somewhat mirrors the American, like the United States current relationship between like local farmers and factory farms, right? Also, factory farms was a topic when I was like still in school. So we talked about like the aspects of factory farm, because there was that whole Michael Moore. Wait, was it his name Michael Moore? The film, like the resurgence of like exposés and sensational documentaries on the aspects of factory farms, right, in the United States. That created like this, it lead to multi-generational, in my opinion, potential misconceptions about the decisions and the requirements in both perspectives, or even more than both perspectives, of the sustainability of scaling food supply up to meet the demands of a growing world population, a consistently exploding world population, right? Although that narrative might have slightly changed in some way over the recent years. And this is all cursory. I'm talking about this from a layman's perspective. Here's a funny side story. In New Zealand, one of the animal physiology with my friends, we took an animal physiology course, and it was about cows, because New Zealand is about the dairy industry. So we actually visited a barn and learned about bloat, and I literally saw a fistulated cow and how they were studying how the rumination of the cow's stomach worked. Animal physiology wasn't about just any animal, it was about cows. It was a very interesting trip. I don't know if you're familiar with what a fistula is, but they drill a hole in the cow's stomach, and then you can like, I literally had my hand inside a cow, like the stomach of a cow, and you can like feel it's like warm. We were learning about like methane and bloat and stuff, and how clothes is contributing to excess increase in cow's bloat, and bloat is very painful, or presumably very painful and uncomfortable. It's a consequence of particular weeds and greens that are proliferating due to like human use. And then to study all of this and how to alleviate, there was a lot of agricultural infused relevance in studying like cattle physiology. Yeah, the more you know. Anyways, I don't know if you watched it before. I think it's a beautiful thing. I would say Clarkson Farm is a beautiful thing that illustrates pretty much what we talked about the last 2 hours. Human perseverance, innovation, iteration, how a person can transition and normalize, create tolerance, and embrace certain pastimes. It's pretty so wonderful to see basically, in my opinion, the retirement of someone, like the later stages. I would love to hope that when I turn 60, maybe I can enjoy some of those periods. I think farming is an incredibly timeless pastime for people. Other than that, maybe I'll just open a bakery. My parents said that they did everything in their life to keep me away from like going like to working food services, and my first thought is like, I think I want to serve food. Like, I want to open a bakery or like a coffee shop, or Dear me, a restaurant, like a small time restaurant, so that I can serve food to people. That sounds amazing. So Clarkson did all of that in Clarkson Farms. And then some. He did all that and then some. So it's pretty neat what he does with his basically his wealth, right? He has a lot of wealth and transfer that into some sort of goodwill kind of thing. Obviously there are antics. It's entertaining TV as well because there's antics. Not with noble intentions. All right. That's enough mulling over. Another thing that I watch. Okay. 私はそんなに上手じゃないので、記事 Oh, 期待 That's a treat. Oh no, that's not treat. That's period. Wait, how does this work? Kitai. I don't actually know how kitai works in this. And then we have de kudasai. So please do not something. I just use do not? Okay. Nasai de? Oh wait. Shinai de. Grammar without use. Oh, it is. So. Not all. Honorific language. Sonkeigo. Negative. I thought it was nasai, but I need to check my conjugation. It's not all nasai. You check your conjugation. Standard. Oh. Maybe like nah. No, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, hold on. I thought it was maybe nakute related. Nasa da nai de? Oh.
私はそんなに上手じゃないので期待なさらないでください。
Dang it. Of course it's ranai. It's not even a ichidan. It doesn't even have a eru or iru ending. Enjogo. Oh. Ring. Or humbly bring. Oh, do. Maybe like, oh. Igetsu. How do you stem to? Omo. E? Omochi.
Tadaima coffeeをお持ちします。
Okay. Alright. That was a little bit surprising. Got it on the first one. We'll do like 20 and then move on. Because we do have to get to Wanikani. Wanikani is going to be really late. Let's cut a little bit from our indulgence. Today's a special day for when you come. We'll probably go as late as we can for it. Parcel. We'll do 5 more. Let's see. I don't know the read of that. Hamotsu? Oh, nimotsu. Oh, right. Or luggage parcel. 荷物が、届いてから、届いてから、let you know. Like, 知らせて、I will let you. Maybe like, 出ましょう。I will let you know. Right? The group. So there's not a lot of Kenjo Go expression. Could be the Itada thing. Maybe not. Not Yon. Very humble. I will. With those of your in-group. So it could be like Marau related or Akeru situation. I don't see how that would work. Maybe like I will do. So like oh shirase shirasete no. Oh suru. Oh shirase shimasu.
荷物が届いてからお知らせいたします。
Itashi. Oh, you could use the past tense with itasu. I use shimasu. And I omitted ita. How does that trigger for omitting? So itasu was what I was looking for. It takes shimasu as well. Interesting. I actually completely ignore itasu here. So you can do suru into, so it's itasu, or you can do all, right? I did all verb stem and shimasu. Or use, right, go for a suru verb. In nowhere did it say I could avoid using itasu. So that's kind of a surprise, actually. Like, I could use shimasu, like suru, as opposed to itasu. The more you know? No? Watashi no yubi wa thin. Or aren't exactly thin. Is this the kedo? Or... Oh no. Not necessarily. You take the adjective, right? Which is hoso. And then you make it negative, I think. Like hoso. I I had a trouble with this the last time too. Maybe it's like hoso nak uh hosoku na is it hosoku nai for something like hoso. Oh, that's what I keep forgetting. Nai
私の
comes
指は細
after.
くはないです。
That is exactly the thing that I drop. So I remember now the hosoku wa, but I keep forgetting in order to negate is the nai gets after. That's so weird. I get the hosoku wa now though. All right, still growing problem. この食べ物は美味しい。美味しい whether or not. でも whether or not. Which whether or not is this? So we have ので。そう、わからないので。ので、食べてみたい。Whether or not is, we could use かどうか。美味しいかどうかわからないので。
この食べ物は美味しいかどうかわからないので食べてみたい。
赤ちゃん、赤ちゃんのいい。赤ちゃんの飲んでいるミルクは、お母さんが作りました。作りました。
赤ちゃんの飲んでいるミルクはお母さんが作りました。
え What is that? Ore? What? Oh, you? Oh, here? What the? Oh, here? The water. I don't remember oh, here at all. Interesting. Yeah. Using... I don't think I have that character. Oh, yeah. So just ice and... Interesting. Oh, here wo Kenjo go requests interrogated. So this is a request. I don't think it's like dealing with gozaimasu. Could you please bring? It's definitely a suru. I think. Oh wait, no, I don't think it's a dekiru thing. I think this is a itasu too. Oh no. It is the itakemasen, right? Is the itakemasen ka? Right? So like 持ってくていただけませんか? Eh? Heck? いただけま... Oops. I added an extra... My keyboard double actuated on. I'm pretty sure it's attached to the te form. What? 持ってきて... Oh no, wait. 持ってきて not て持ってき... Ah, 来て持ってきて or is it 来て? Pretty sure it's 来て, right? いただけ
お部屋を持ってきていただけませんか？
いただけ ah man いただけませんか? Oh, もしも。
もしピザを食べたかったら自分のお金で買ってね。
Alright. I know we're supposed to finish up all these grammar points, but that's okay. We got some grammar points. When is the next one? Guess we'll have something to do for tomorrow. Alright, folks. That's a wrap for our Bunpro session today. If you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. Right? As always, you can feel free to follow along, pick up Bunpro for yourself, give it a go. You're always welcome to come on by and yap, discuss, talk about things. It may not seem like what I'm talking about is related to language learning. I didn't quite get back to language learning. However, to wrap up the core things, right? Perseverance, diligence, solving problems, and then iterating on it to see more problems. That's kind of what learning is. So despite me going on and on about very specific topics, I think the things that I talk about are not context, they're not context dependent in the sense of subject matter, right? What I talk about when I talk about perseverance, motivation, and looking at things, right, both objectively and subjectively, or at the interface of that, it plays into quite, in my opinion, for myself, quite literally everything I do. I mean, it's difficult to reject that part when I am making the assertion that it's part of being human. So hopefully with all that digression and that meandering and introducing other people that I met, like MAKU, who hasn't been here at the serendipitously, they're probably sleeping, about World Cups and that jury thing. Exercising the noggin is part of making all of this experience priceless. And then my last spiel about Clarkson Farms, human preservation, human perseverance, the willingness to learn. One of my favorite parts about the Clarkson Farm is the willingness to learn, to dispel or even adapt or confirm one's own predilections, opinions, and perspectives of the world. So learning a language is that to me. It is undeniably passion driven. So No one is telling me, hey, by the way, you'll feel miserable if you don't complete your studies. I'm not saying it's an excuse to not finish your studies, obviously. However, my priorities are let's have this moment together and seize the moment. So, for that, we can always get our grammar in tomorrow. Anyways, until next time, right? 皆さんまたね。見てくれてありがとう. Thanks for watching or listening. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm gonna get up, take a quick bathroom break, and walk around, and I'll be back for Hanzihiro. Quick Hanzihiro. Back to Wanikani. We'll be right back. Thank you.